Hey now. Hey now. Actually, a little early. Actually, a few minutes early for once. Instead of several minutes late, we're a few minutes early. Welcome to another stream. We are going to be reading The Return of the King here today. Let me go ahead and get the word out that we are live. Oh, I need to get the YouTube URL. That takes a moment. Here we are. Okay. All right, I don't need to be hearing myself. Alrighty then, there we go. All right, there we go. Hey, Matt Damon, how's it going? How are you doing? We're going to be reading The Return of the King today, which is always somewhat exciting. All right, I have the blended chat here, but I also have, there's Twitch. Where's YouTube again? I had that over here. Hey, Walter. Dylan. Wait a minute, I don't even see, why am I not seeing Dylan on the blended chat? Now, the blended chat is back to not working, huh? That's strange. Okay. You haven't caught the newest episode yet, but you're curious as to my answer to Bjorn's powers. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's mostly surmise. But I'm doing good, Matt. I'm doing good. It's mostly surmise, but I'll give you like the real short version of it. Is that in one of Tolkien's letters, he said that Bjorn was a man, not a bear. And that he was a bit of a magician. And the word magician is really interesting because it suggests that what he does in turning into a bear like that is a learned skill. And then I pulled from a few other sources and a few little things here and there to basically link Bjorn and people like Bjorn back to the Atanatari, which are the fathers of men that came out of the east fleeing from Morgoth. So there you have it there. But and I also go into the linguistics and the connections to Beowulf, and I talk a little bit about I like to put answers together. If you notice in an episode where there's like common themes between them, so like I talked about the fathers of men in a few different ones, and I talked about Beowulf and Selleck Spell in a few different ones. So it's just the way it is. Hey there, Fast and Furiosa, how's it going? You usually miss my streams and you have to catch up via VOD. Well, you're here today, and we're going to be reading The Return of the King, which is exciting. We're starting with book 5, chapter 2. We read Minas Tirith, which so we didn't get very far in the last stream. We only got up to page, well, it starts see it actually, what's interesting is that my copy of The Return of the King, and I think this is important because my new copy of The Return of the King actually starts on page 731. And I think that the reason that it does that is because, unlike my old copy, which was from the 70s, since then they've published The Lord of the Rings as a single book, So when people say, oh, on page 700 and somewhat, like, what are you talking about? None of the books are that long, So it sort of keeps things very uniform and easy to understand. Like, I'll tell you, when this book came out, let me grab it. So what I have here is, this is the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, but this is the new one. This is the revised and expanded. There's a whole bunch of new letters. And when they said that they were going to publish, or I should say to republish, Tolkien's letters with a whole bunch of new content, everybody was sort of, well, how is that going to work? Because are you going to put the new content like sort of at the end, or is it going to be integrated into it so that it's all in chronological order? And if so, how are we handling the numbers? Because everybody that studies Tolkien makes these references. They'll say letter 131, letter 68 or whatever, And so what it is that, let me find one of the new ones here. There's quite a few of them. But also his letters are quite long, so... Well, not all of them. Some of them are very, very short. But I should probably go earlier. But, there are quite a... Here. Like, so there's letter 132, which was sent on the 10th of February, 1952. And then letter 133 was sent in June 22nd of 1952. And so they published a new letter... that was sent March 23rd, so they just put it as 132A. Tolkien smoked tobacco. He smoked a pipe. He was aware of sort of the burgeoning drug culture of the 60s, but he was not involved in it in any way. He didn't partake in that particular... way of it. He had his vices, of course, but it was really just tobacco. Tobacco was his big thing. Tobacco and food and beer. He loved beer as well. But then again, like if any Englishman from that era would have been all about tobacco and beer, because that's that's what you did. That's why the hobbits are. The hobbits are always. There's very few hobbits that don't smoke tobacco. As a matter of fact. I think the only one of the major hobbits that we know of that we could definitively say either does not smoke tobacco or either smokes so little of it that there's no references to it is Frodo. There's one small, tiny little reference to Sam smoking at one point. But for the most part, he doesn't seem to smoke very much. But Tolkien wasn't like Frodo or Sam. Tolkien was like Bilbo. He was constantly puffing his pipe, He was really, really into that. So there you have it. But we're going to get started in a little bit, but I wanted to, give people time to come on in and everything. And especially since, I have to keep both chats open because my blended chat is not... Oh, now it's working. Oh, you know what? Walter, Dylan might have sent those messages either before I switched over to multi-chat. But yeah. Tolkien. You have to understand also that cannabis was not only was it illegal at the time in the UK. But the penalty was actually really, really rough, So it was not really all that popular in the UK. I mean, of course there were people that did it, but not as many as you might expect, in the 60s and such. But yeah, so the last time we read Minas Tirith, which is an exciting chapter. Not because of any action that happens or any deep lore or anything, but just because it introduces Denethor, and it gives us a lot of time with Pippin, because Pippin becomes the focal character at that point, Huh. Oh, hey, Deb. You have a meeting with the boss in a bit, but you'll try to hop on afterwards. Of course, no problem. And I see you have a little moon logo on your Gandalf G rune there. But we're going to continue with the Return of the King. But the Return of the King is interesting because it jumps around a lot. Now, the Two Towers and the Fellowship of the Ring are different. The Fellowship of the Ring has two. All of these books have two halves: the first half and the second half. And the Fellowship of the Ring, both halves exclusively follow Frodo. Hey there, Wayne. Located entirely in Minas Tirith, yes. Hey, Laurel, how's it going? I was just about to text you. So the Return of the King exclusively follows Frodo. And then the Two Towers is broken into these two parts that take place simultaneously. But the first half is exclusively really following... well, it's not exclusively following. I was going to say Merry, but because there are parts that follow Aragorn. So it sort of jumps between Aragorn and Merry. And then the second half is really following Sam. We could say it's Frodo, but it's really Sam. Because there's a lot of times when Frodo's asleep and we're told what Sam's up to. But when Sam's asleep, we're not told what Frodo's up to. So it's really Sam becomes the focal character. But the Return of the King is interesting because every chapter jumps to a different character. So Minas Tirith, we were following Pippin. And then we're going to go over to the Passing of the Grey Company, which is following Aragorn. And then the Muster of Rohan really follows, I would say, follows Merry more than anybody else, you know. And then the next chapter, the Siege of Gondor, goes back to Pippin. And then the Ride of the Rohirrim goes back to Merry. And then the Battle of the Pelennor Fields is a really interesting one, because it starts off sort of following Merry, but then towards the end, Merry's sort of out of it, and it just sort of follows the battle with all these characters because Aragorn arrives and such, you know. Then we go to the Pyre of Denethor, which follows Pippin. The Houses of Healing pretty much follows Aragorn, because he goes to visit Merry, and then he goes to visit Éowyn, and, you know, he's sort of moving around the city and doing these different things. It really follows Aragorn at that point. And then the last debate, I would say, is another Aragorn chapter. I would say that's unequivocally an Aragorn chapter. The Black Gate opens... Well, at this point, starting with the last debate and then going through the Black Gate opens are two chapters together that are following multiple characters at this, because they're all together. It's Aragorn, and it's Pippin, and it's Imrahil, and it's Gandalf, you know, and Legolas and Gimli as well too. And then, you know, then finally we're going to catch up with Sam and follow him for several chapters in a row. You know, really, actually, I would say that you follow Sam for the rest of the book. Especially since even Frodo sails off to the west, and then we follow Sam home, you know, to the Shire. So, and then of course, that's the thing about this: the Return of the King looks like a really thick book compared to the other two. But the issue with that is that this much of it here is the Return of the King, and that's the appendix. So there's a lot of appendix, and we are going to be going through the appendixes, of course. Now, let's talk about this very briefly before we start. Is after we're done with this, and keep in mind that this is many months off. You know, hey, Wasted Quake Ranger, how's it going? This is months off, but at some point we're going to be done with the Lord of the Rings. We finish The Hobbit, and we'll finish the Lord of the Rings, and then we sort of have several different options, and the obvious one to go to would be the Silmarillion. But this is going to take a long time, even though it's not that long of a book, simply because you have to stop and talk about the lore and break things down and analyze things. Every page, every line almost. And I thought it might be interesting and fun before we handle that to do something a bit different, you know. And let me know if you guys, you know, you think that's a terrible idea, but I kind of wanted to go over here to the Tolkien Reader, which has a lot of his shorter sort of stuff. Essays on the craft of writing fantasy. It's got a little of the homecoming of Bjornoth, Bjornhelm's son. On Fairy Stories is in here. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil is in here. Leaf by Neagle is in here. I did read that to you guys at one point, but that was, it was awkward because I was on my phone, and it was when I didn't have a computer. I'd love to do it again. And of course, it has Farmer Giles of Ham, which is a really fun story, and The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is just some poems that are really fun, so... The Silmarillion is probably less interesting than, say, the Lost Tales. Well, are you referring to the Book of Lost Tales, or are you referring to Unfinished Tales, Deb? Because they're very different. The Silmarillion is actually, I think, is the most interesting, and I actually would tell anybody that thinks it's not interesting or it's less interesting, you need to hear me read the Silmarillion, because you're gonna look at it in a completely different way. You know what I mean? But I think that, but the thing is, we want to cover everything eventually. But I think that, you're talking about Unfinished. So the issue with Unfinished Tales is there's some of it, I have it right here, there's some of it that it's beneficial to read right after The Lord of the Rings. And there's some of it that is beneficial to read right after the Silmarillion. Because if we look at the contents here, I mean, we have a very late draft of The Fall of Gondolin. And then we have a fragmented version of The Children of Hurin, which I'd rather just cover The Children of Hurin as one finished work when we do that, Eldari and Arendis is just a really fun story that just stops suddenly. But then everything after that is like really good to read after The Lord of the Rings, because we have the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. We have the disaster of the Gladden Fields. We have Cirion and Eorl. So right there, we're covering some important characters. We're covering the founding of Rohan and Isildur, you know what I mean? And then, The Hunt for the Ring is just a really big story about the Nazgul. The Battle of the Fords of Isen. This is practically more appendix to The Lord of the Rings, some of this. And then we get to the Istari, which, the Palantiri. So, Unfinished Tales is kind of a difficult one to actually nail down how to actually do it, but I might even break it up. We might read the Third Age stuff first, after The Lord of the Rings, and then sort of work our way backwards. Read the first two parts after the Silmarillion. And then there's the fourth section, which has the issue, I think that stuff, it's not Third Age specifically, but Druidine, Istari, Palantiri, that's all sort of like very useful for if you've read The Lord of the Rings, So it's, it's a difficult one to put down. I would almost say we do the Silmarillion before Unfinished Tales, just because it was published first. I don't know. Hey there, Ted. Once we start on the road of doing the history of Middle-earth, that's 12 books, and that's a long, long thing, but we'll want to just do that, contiguous, and probably the nature of Middle Earth right after that. But like I said, I want to break things up with fun things every once in a while, like Roverandom or Farmer Giles of Ham. We did the Father Christmas letters already. I did that because it was Christmas. I thought that would be, I was like, wow, Christmas Day is a Thursday, and I'm free to stream there. I never would stream on Christmas Eve, because that's usually when we're doing family things, but Christmas Day is usually not really that big of a deal. So, I thought that would be fun, and it was a lot of fun. And I mean, I also have his poems, and I have his letter. The letters are something that we're going to have to get through. And then I have all of these great tales, and Beowulf and the Green Knight, and, so, there's a lot to get through for reading stuff. We're going to be doing this for years. But I was just thinking, and even the Return of the King is probably going to take a long time. I mean, we only got through one chapter last stream. Yeah. So, well, if you stick with me, Deb, you'll hear everything. Eventually, right? But yeah, it's and then at some point, because I always say, after when people say, well, how should I read? How should I tackle all this? And I'll say, well, here's the thing, you read The Hobbit first, and then you read the Lord of the Rings, and then it's sort of like, well, what do you want, right? Do you want another story? Then read The Children of Hurin. Do you want a lot of the stuff put into context? Read Unfinished Tales. Do you want the history? Read the Silmarillion. But after you do that, all of those things, or whatever, after you read the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales especially, go back and read The Hobbit again. Go back and read The Hobbit again, Go back and read The Lord of the Rings again. Because, I've met people who started with the Silmarillion, which is really funny to me, because most people are like, wow, I love The Hobbit, I love Lord of the Rings, tried to read the Silmarillion, it's rough. Difficult read, It's so different, and it's, like almost like a history book, which is basically what it is. That's why I say, well, maybe read The Children of Hurin instead. But... but I said, but after you get through the Silmarillion and you understand it and you've read it and everything, yeah, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, they hit really different. They're very, very different at that point. They're not, like all of a sudden, but then again, as I've been going through these, I've been explaining all the Silmarillion stuff as well, especially, like in the Hobbit, which I was like, the first time I went back and reread The Hobbit after the Silmarillion, I was like, wow, there's more in here than I thought there was, about the past, and like the flight of the elves and everything. It's all in there, it's told in like Bilbo's sort of style and language, but it's there, and it's really interesting, Anyway, let's get started here. Let me go ahead and move this over to here, right? And actually, I've never really sat. I just got these new copies of all these books, and I never really looked at the designs all that closely. I mean, The Hobbit, has the Misty Mountains with the eagles and the sun on it, but all of the 3 volumes of the Lord of the Rings have the ring, but there's a different design on each of them. So in the Fellowship of the Ring, you'll notice that there's the script around it, the Tengwar, it says, one ring to rule them all and all that. And then there's 3 rings, which I would assume the symbology here, especially since you can see that they do have gems, or that's the 3 elven rings, and in the center, the Eye of Sauron. And then the 2 towers here, actually has 2 towers on it. Not sure which ones they're represented, but you still have the ring, you still have the Tengwar script there, but now you have the 2 towers, and you have like the Nazgul bird, and I would assume that one is Barad-dûr and the other is, well, actually, that's probably Minas Morgul, because it has the moon on it, and then this is a star, not the sun, it's a star, so that's probably Isengard. And then the Return of the King symbology here is we have a crown, we have the white tree, and this is the ring, but it's also, it's got these little feet here like a palantir, so it sort of represents the palantir as well. Not sure about the wings. The wings are, I mean, it could represent the eagles, it could represent Imrahil, it could be a lot of things. Let me get these back in order on my shelf, and then we'll start reading. I have to get ready to do the Gandalf voice. All right. Although he's not in the next chapter, so maybe we'll get to Gandalf, maybe one. Here we go. We're going to start with Book 5, Chapter 2, The Passing of the Grey Company. Gandalf was gone, and the thudding hoofs of Shadowfax were lost in the night, when Merry came back to Aragorn. He had only a light bundle, for he had lost his pack at Parth Galen, and all he had was a few useful things he had picked up among the wreckage of Isengard. Hasafel was already saddled. Legolas and Gimli with their horse stood close by. So 4 of the company still remain, said Aragorn. We will ride on together, but we shall not go alone. As I thought, the king is now determined to set out at once. Since the coming of the winged shadow, he desires to return to the hills under cover of night. And then whither? Said Legolas. I cannot say yet, Aragorn answered. As for the king, he will go to the muster that he commanded at Edoras 4 nights from now. And there, I think, he will hear tidings of war, and the riders of Rohan will go down to Minas Tirith. But for myself, and any that will go with me, I for one, cried Legolas. And Gimli with him, said the dwarf. Well, for myself, said Aragorn, it is dark before me. I must go down also to Minas Tirith, but I do not yet see the road. An hour long prepared approaches. Don't leave me behind, said Merry. I have not been of much use yet, but I don't want to be laid aside like baggage to be called for when all is over. I don't think the riders will want to be bothered with me now, though, of course, the king did say that I was to sit by him when he came to his house and tell him all about the Shire. Yes, said Aragorn, and your road lies with him, I think, Merry. But do not look for mirth at the ending. It will be long, I fear, ere Theoden sits at ease again in Meduseld. Many hopes will wither in this bitter spring. Hey, Mogul, how's it going? Let me just see what Deb said. The Silmarillion, you liken the Silmarillion to the Bible in Genesis, lots of names and begats. Yeah, it is sort of like, it's sort of like the Middle-earth Bible, right? This is like but it's like the elves version of it, you know? Absolutely. I mean, it certainly starts off, Ainulindala is a lot like, you know, Genesis, and then, you know, the Quintus Silmarillion is sort of like Exodus, you know, so it does make sense, you know, and then of course you have Akalabeth and the Rings of Power. So yeah, it's an apt thing. The only difference is the people that wrote it, they weren't trying to start a religion, I don't think. They were just writing down stories of their tales and everything. But of course, you know, like there's a lot to talk about with the Silmarillion, and we'll certainly get to that. I was just thinking that it might not be wise to jump immediately into it after the Return of the King, and that we might want to break, you know, just do a little bit more lighthearted stuff first, and then jump into it. Soon all were ready to depart, 24 horses, with Gimli behind Legolas, and Merry in front of Aragorn. Presently they were riding swiftly through the night. They had not long passed the mounds of the fords of Isen when a rider galloped up from the rear of their line. "My lord," he said to the king, "there are horsemen behind us. As we crossed the fords I thought that I heard them. Now we are sure. They are overtaking us, riding hard." Theoden at once called a halt. The riders turned about and seized their spears. Aragorn dismounted and set Merry on the ground, and drawing his sword he stood by the king's stirrup. Éomer and his esquire rode back to the rear. Merry felt more like unneeded baggage than ever, and he wondered if there was a fight what he should do. Supposing the king's small escort was trapped and overcome, but he escaped into the darkness. alone in the wild fields of Rohan, with no idea of where he was in all the endless miles? No good, he thought. He drew his sword and tightened his belt. So let me just talk about Merry's sort of like attitude there, because what we're seeing is real bravery, because Merry's first thought, as someone who is not as tall as these guys like Aragorn and Éomer and Theoden and or Legolas, he's not really even really strong like Gimli is, He's just a hobbit, and he hasn't at this point been in any sort of real combat situation yet. He's really untested, and he's sort of like thinking, as many hobbits do, okay, something's going down. They're talking about these riders that are coming up on us really fast, and everybody's like, well, okay, we don't know what's happening. It could be something good, or it could be something really bad. Let's all prepare for it to be something really bad. And everybody's sort of like, getting their weapons out and taking their stances and taking these tactical positions. And Merry's first immediate thought is, well, if it gets really bad, I could just run off somewhere, and nobody would really notice me because I'm so small and I'm so unimportant. But then he starts to think, well, but then what would I do? Just sort of like I'm in really far from home. I don't even know how to get back to the Shire, and even then, if I did that, would I be able to live with myself? So he's like immediately like, all right, here we go. And this is the first time that he's really taking out his sword and being prepared for a fight. And of course, that's not what's going to happen. The riders that are coming up on them are not foes; they are friends. But it's just interesting, the sort of thing that he's sort of having a Bilbo moment. I think he's having a Bilbo moment, and I mean Bilbo in the Hobbit moment, where it's sort of like, man, I wish I could just be out of this, and then realizing, well, I can't, so I might as well just go with it and do the best that I can. Moogle with the watch streak. Here we go. The sinking moon was obscured by a great sailing cloud, but suddenly it rode out clear again. Then they all heard the sound of hoofs, and at the same moment they saw dark shapes coming swiftly on the path from the fords. The moonlight glinted here and there on the points of spears. The number of the pursuers could not be told, but they seemed no fewer than the king's escort at the least. When they were some 50 paces off, Éomer cried in a loud voice, "Halt! Halt! Who rides in Rohan?" The pursuers brought their steeds to a sudden stand. A silence followed. And then in the moonlight a horseman could be seen dismounting and walking slowly forward. His hand showed white as he held it up, palm outward, in token of peace, but the king's men gripped their weapons. At 10 paces the man stopped. He was tall, a dark standing shadow. Then his clear voice rang out, "Rohan! Rohan, did you say? That is a glad word. We seek that land in haste from long afar." "You have found it," said Éomer. "When you crossed the fords yonder, you entered it. But it is the realm of Theoden the king. None ride here save by his leave. Who are you, and what is your haste?" Halbarad, Dunadan, Ranger of the North I am," cried the man. "We seek one Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and we heard that he was in Rohan." "And you have found him also," cried Aragorn. Giving his reins to Merry, he ran forward and embraced the newcomer. "Halbarad," he said, "of all joys this is the least expected." Merry breathed a sigh of relief. He had thought that this was some last trick of Saruman's to waylay the king, while he had only a few men about him, but it seemed that there would be no need to die in Theoden's defence. Not yet, at any rate. He sheathed his sword. "All is well," said Aragorn, turning back. "Here are some of my own kin from the far land where I dwelt. But why they come, and how many they be, Halbarad shall tell us." "I have 30 with me," said Halbarad. "That is all of our kindred that could be gathered in haste, but the brethren Elladan and Elrohir have ridden with us, desiring to go to the war. We rode as swiftly as we might when your summons came." "But I did not summon you," said Aragorn, "save only in wish. My thoughts have often returned to you, and seldom more than tonight. Yet I have sent no word. But come, all such matters must wait. You find us riding in haste, in danger. Ride with us now, if the king will give his leave. Theoden was indeed glad of the news. It is well, he said. If these kinsmen be in any way like to yourself, my lord Aragorn, 30 such knights will be a strength that cannot be counted by heads. Okay. It may have been an easy swearing in with Theoden, but Merry took it very seriously. Well, Merry is sort of a serious fellow. A lot of people don't realize that, you know. He's, you know, it's interesting, especially when you return to book one and you look at, you know, sort of Frodo's personality and you compare Merry's personality. And at first they're sort of like both sort of jokey cousins, you know, with each other. And then there's a time skip. And Frodo's still sort of this happy-go-lucky fellow, and Merry's actually become much more serious, and it's probably just the upbringing, because, you know, like, Frodo was sort of like, you know, oh, hey, you're 33, that makes you an adult, and now you own this house, and goodbye. You know, his parents have been dead since he was 2. His uncle that took him in, Rorimak, is way off in Buckland, and then Bilbo, you know, he's a very unserious fellow, you know. And then he leaves, and then Frodo's sort of like, hey, you know, now I'm this rich guy, and I can do kind of like whatever I want. And then Merry, you know, he has very serious parents, and he's being, you know, sort of groomed to be the Master of Buckland in the future. So he's sort of a very serious character. When he says that he's going to do something, he does it. He does it, and he does it well, I think. Now, I want to talk about Elladan and Elrohir because they're going to be sort of important going on. Even though they don't have big roles, they are being sort of like added to the cast. Now, we've seen them before, back in Book 2, when the Fellowship was formed in Rivendell. The sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir, were sent out to as some of the scouts that Elrond set out, and they went down to Lothlorien. And it's a question that I actually get a lot, like, where did they go? Like, because you know, they said they went down the Silver Lode, and they would not say where they went. You know, they just went down the Silver Lode, and I'm thinking, all you have to do is look at the map, and you can see the Silver Lode runs right into Lothlorien. They were there to see their grandparents, Galadriel and Celeborn. But I want to really talk about their names. They're going to be traveling with Aragorn and Merry. Well, Merry's not going to be traveling with them, but for a little while with Merry, but mostly with Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas. And I want to talk about their names. Now, first of all, it's just to be mentioned that they are twins. They are twins, and they are Arwen's older brothers, and we don't know which is the older twin and which is the younger twin. You know, usually it's like, well, who's older? Oh, he's 10 minutes older than I am, sort of situation. We don't know which one. I would assume that it's Elladan, simply because it's always said Elladan and Elrohir. It's never Elrohir and Elladan, so I would assume that he comes first in that sense, but that is just an assumption. You don't have to say, well, John Sierra said he's older, therefore he is. I'm guessing. I want to talk about the fact that they are twins, and they are the son of a twin, because, of course, Elrond had a twin brother. His name is Elros. He chose to be mortal. He became the first king of Numenor. And, of course, his distant descendant, about 60 generations later, we have Aragorn at that point. So that's really interesting. But the names are interesting. So we look at Elrond and Elros, and what's really interesting, and everybody sort of looks at me funny when I bring this up, and you guys are going to look at me funny. But Elrond and Elros are not really their, like, sort of real names, in a sense. Mogul, could you ban that guy, please? Funny that we get a spam bot whose name starts with linguistic when I'm doing a literary analysis here. But either Mogul or Wayne, if you can get rid of that spammer, please. Anyway, Elrond and Elros are names that were given to them not by their parents. Their parents, of course, Eärendil and Elwing. And I have to assume, thank you, Wayne, I have to assume that Eärendil and Elwing had names in mind for their children, but they were forced by circumstance and because of the war and all the terrible things that were happening, all the atrocities, I should say, to sort of they were forced to abandon their twin sons and go to the Undying Lands without them. And Elrond and Elros were essentially kidnapped by two Feanorians. Their names are Mathros and Maglor. And they were raised by murderous lunatics. They were raised by kidnappers. And they were the ones that gave the two boys the names Elrond and Elros. And they both refer to where they were found. Of course, El refers to elves, but it also refers to the stars. The Eldar, the star people, the children of Iluvatar under the stars, right? And whenever you see that prefix, that El, E-L, it refers to the elves. It also refers to the stars. And Elrond is sort of referring to a vault of stars, and Elros is referring to the sea foam under the stars, because they were found in a cave behind a waterfall by the Feanorians. So it's interesting that they were given these similar names that have similar sort of meanings. But of course, like I've always wondered, and if I, Tolkien was alive at the same time that I was, and I was able to write him a letter, I would say, well, what did Elrond's parents name him? That's sort of like a big thing. Like I've always wondered that. You're just going to guess that Maglor was the better parent of the two. You would be correct. Out of all of Feanor's sons, well, they were all sort of maniacs, right? Maglor was the most even-tempered one, He was sort of the one that was like, well, I made my bed and now I got to lie in it, But he still did really bad things, but he was not as bad as his brothers. Like, some of them are really, really bad. Like, that Celegorm was a real creep. But anyway, what's interesting, by the way, and I go into this in, I don't know if it's episode 150 or 151. I don't remember. But what's interesting is that the name Maglor was originally a different character altogether. It was Beren, actually. And Thingol was called Caranthir, so a lot of the names got shuffled around. And then, because there was also a Maelor, but I forget which episode I talked about this. It was one of the most recent ones. But anyway, now Elrond winds up having twins. So he's a twin, and he winds up having twins, which is sort of like really interesting. And we have Elladan and Elrohir, and they both start with that E-L, And you'll see it in the family because, their sister Arwen has a son. And what's his name? Eldarion, But Elladan and Elrohir is really interesting. Obviously, the El part refers to elf, even though they are half elves. And they, like their father and like their great-grandfather, like their grandfather and their grandmother, and even to a certain extent going further back, but really it started with Eärendil and Elwing. They have a choice whether or not they're going to be elves or men, but they're really, on that sort of like knife's edge at this moment where they are functionally immortal. They're older than Arwen, so they're over 3,000 years old, and they were born very, very, either very, very, I forget it whether it's early in the Third Age or late in the Second Age. I think it's early in the Third Age, though. And their names are really interesting because El is elf, and Adan means man. El Adan, elf man. And then El Rohir. Now, I've talked about Rohir as a linguistic element recently, but just notice that, like, they're coming to Rohan, the land of the Rohirrim, which just means the horse lords, or just much more simply, knights. So we have elf man, elf knight, and they both come as knights riding on horses to the Southlands, to Rohan, and then they're going to go to Gondor. So, it's just really interesting the way that works out. And we don't know what their fate is, by the way. That's one thing that we don't know. And that's a thing that I probably would have asked Tolkien this if I could, and he would not have answered. He would have said, well, I don't know, what happens to them, whether they become mortal or whether they stay as immortals and pass into the West, or whether one becomes immortal and the other doesn't. Hey, Kits, how's it going? We really don't know. Elrond's sons are a big mystery, right? It could go either way. But what's really interesting here, and a lot of people like the idea that one becomes mortal and the other becomes immortal, just simply because that's what happened to Elrond and Elros. But it's just interesting, the linguistic similarities of the names to their father and their uncle, and also that they both essentially have the elements of an elf and a man in there, just one being specifically man and the other being knight. A man on a horse, which is what a knight really is. People think that a knight is something that's a title that is given by a monarch, and that's sort of what we have in our modern society, where you get knighted and then you're called sir and all that. But what knight was really just any noble on a horse. If you were a noble and you had a suit of armor and a horse, you were a knight. That's how it worked, You always imagine that they became spirits of the forest of their former home. So what you're imagining is that they chose to be immortal and eventually faded and resisted the call to Mandos, did not go to the Undying Lands, did not get new bodies, and they just sort of became what the hobbits would refer to as fairies. And it's interesting. That's interesting. I myself like that we don't know. I like that we don't know what happens to them. I think it's interesting because we don't have to know every single thing that happens to every single character. We know a lot already. You know what I mean? We know a lot. But it's always so cool when there's something we don't know that we can have a discussion about. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the names Eladon and Elrohir in relation to Elrond and Elros. And especially that Elrond and Elros, like I said, not really their real names in the sense that they were names given to them by kidnappers. And I just wondered if they know what their names that their parents gave them were. Elrond will, find out when he meets his parents in the Undying Lands. But Elros, maybe he found out. There were a lot of elves that came from the Undying Lands to Numenor back in the day. Hey, Anons. But and of course he took the name Tar-Miniatur anyway. So all right, let's continue here. So we have Eladon and Elrohir just introduced here. Then the riders set out again, and Aragorn for a while rode with the Dunedain. And when they had spoken of tidings in the north and in the south, Elrohir said to him, I bring word to you from my father. The days are short. If thou art in haste, remember the paths of the dead. Always my days have seemed to me too short to achieve my desire, answered Aragorn. But great indeed will be my haste ere I take to that road. That will soon be seen, said Elrohir. But let us speak no more of these things upon the open road. And Aragorn said to Halbarad, What is it that you bear, kinsman? For he saw that indeed, instead of a spear, he bore a tall staff, as it were a standard, but it was close furled in a black cloth bound about with many thongs. It is a gift that I bring you from the Lady of Rivendell, answered Halbarad. She wrought it in secret, and long was the making. But she also sent words to you. The days are short. Either our hope cometh, or all hopes end. Therefore I send thee what I have made for thee. Farewell, Elfstone. And Aragorn said, Now I know what you bear. Bear it still for me a while. And he turned and looked away to the north under the great stars, and then he fell silent and spoke no more while the night's journey lasted. Let's talk about Aragorn as a character here. Begone and take your house of cats with you. Good night, Tevildo. Aragorn is a prophet. There is no real way of getting around that. We talked about this a great deal in Book 2 when he prophesied that Gandalf was going to die if they went into Moria. He didn't say the quest will fail. He didn't say the ring will fall into the hands of evil. He didn't say something bad was going to happen to Frodo. He didn't say something bad was going to happen to him. He said, I'm worried about Gandalf specifically. And there was no reason for him to think that other than, well, you know, he's got that gift. You know, he is a descendant of a lot of very powerful seers in the distant past, the greatest of which would have been Melian, who was one of the Ainur. But this is interesting here because, you know, he's now receiving prophecy. He receives it from Elrond, who tells him, hey, man, you're going to have to take the pass of the dead. And he's like, well, I would only really do that if I really needed to. And then he receives prophecy from Arwen. You really need to. And these are not things that have coordinated. These are things that were separate because Arwen made this standard, which is a very, very big flag that you could bear into battle. And she made it secretly, and it said it took her a long time. Now, for Eladon, I'm sorry, not for Eladon. Who said it? Let's see. Let me go back to this. For Halbarad to say that it took Arwen a long time to make this standard, we're talking about a span of years, right? We're talking about a span of years. So likely she was working on this thing before Frodo set out on his journey. She's like, Aragorn's going to need this, and he's going to need it in Rohan. Or he's going to need it in Gondor, but he's going to be in Rohan. So, you know, she's doing a little prophesying. And then all of a sudden he says, I know what you have there. And then he looks to the stars. And this is where he really knows, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And, yeah, let's just continue there. I just wanted to point out that Elrond has the gift of prophecy. Arwen has the gift of prophecy. Aragorn has the gift of prophecy. The night was old and the east grey when they rode up at last from the deeping coombe and came back to the Hornburg. There they were to lie and rest for a brief while, and take counsel. Merry slept until he was roused by Legolas and Gimli. The sun is high, said Legolas. All others are up and doing. Come, Master Sluggard, and look at this place while you may. There was a battle here 3 nights ago, said Gimli. And here Legolas and I played a game that I won only by a single orc. Come and see how it was. And there are caves, Merry, caves of wonder. Shall we visit them, Legolas, do you think? Nay, there is no time, said the elf. Do not spoil the wonder with haste. I have given you my word to return hither with you in a day of peace, and freedom comes again. But it is now near to noon, and at that hour we eat, and then set out again, I hear. Merry got up and yawned. His few hours' sleep had not been nearly enough. He was tired and rather dismal. He missed Pippin and felt that he was only a burden while everybody was making plans for speed in a business that he did not fully understand. Where is Aragorn? He asked. In a high chamber of the burg, said Legolas. He has neither rested nor slept, I think. He went thither some days ago, saying that he must take thought, and only his kinsman Halbarad went with him. But some dark doubt or care sits on him. They are a strange company, these newcomers, said Gimli. Stout men and lordly they are. And the riders of Rohan look almost as boys beside them, for they are grim men of face, worn like weathered rocks for the most part, even as Aragorn himself, and they are silent. But even as Aragorn, they are courteous if they break their silence, said Legolas. And have you marked the brethren, Elahan and Elrohir, less sombre is their gear than the others? And they are fair and gallant as elven lords, and that is not to be wondered at in the sons of Elrond of Rivendell. Why have they come? Have you heard? Asked Merry. He now had dressed, and he flung his grey cloak about his shoulders, and the three passed out together toward the ruined gate of the burg. They answered the summons as you heard, said Gimli. Word came to Rivendell, they say. Aragorn has need of his kindred. Let the Dunedain ride to him in Rohan. But whence this message came, they are now in doubt. Gandalf sent it, I would guess. Nay, Galadriel, said Legolas. Did she not speak through Gandalf of the ride of the Grey Company from the north? Yes, you have it, said Gimli. The Lady of the Wood. She read many hearts and desires. Now, why did we not wish for some of our own kinsfolk, Legolas? Legolas stood before the gate and turned his bright eyes away north and east, and his fair face was troubled. I do not think that they would come, he answered. They have no need to ride to war. War already marches on their own lands. So this is really interesting because we don't hear a lot about what's actually happening in the north part of Middle-earth at this point. I mean, we're sort of in the north part, but for the section that we're confined to, the northeast section of Middle-earth, the northern part of that, we don't hear a lot about what's going on in places like Mirkwood and Dale and Erebor and Esgaroth, and we learn about it later because Sauron's forces are marching up on them. Not orcs out of Mordor, but Easterlings out of Rhûn. And, what's interesting is that, Galadriel, basically they're coming to the conclusion that Galadriel is responsible for her grandsons showing up here. And she's the reason why Aragorn is getting this backup. Now, there's an unfortunate consequence of all of these Rangers of the North coming to the south, because the area that they were protecting was the Shire, and now that's kind of wide open. And of course, that's how the story ends, is with the war coming to the Shire. Even after it's supposedly ended, there's still unfinished business with Saruman. But they're saying, okay, but Galadriel must have known that Aragorn really wanted these guys, Elladan and Elrohir, who were kind of like brothers to him in a way, and Halbarad, who's, sort of like a cousin of his as it is, and all these different guys to come, that he really wants them there. He didn't summon them except for in his heart. And that's how Legolas knows that it was Galadriel, because she was reading everybody's mind, she was reading everybody's heart, she was looking at the desires and saying, what can I fulfill here? Who can I help, in this situation? And she's juggling a lot of things behind the scenes, She's doing a lot that we don't really know because it's all very subtle and very unspoken and very unseen. But here's a little, pull back the curtain and take a look at what Galadriel might have been doing in this situation. However, then we have Gimli saying, well, man, I could have thought about, hey, man, I'd really like a whole bunch of dwarves to come with me. And Legolas, you could have said, oh, man, a whole bunch of elves from Mirkwood, and we would have had like a whole army then, And Legolas is like, he looks out to the north and to the east. He's looking at Mirkwood right now. Now, he's not able to really see Mirkwood. There's mountains in the way, the curvature of the earth and all this stuff, right? I mean, being able to see Mirkwood from Rohan is basically like, I'm in Switzerland and I'm just going to go like this and I'm just going to be able to see the Black Forest of Germany. It's just not going to happen, But he's seeing it in another way. Legolas also has other sight. Legolas is really able to see things that other people can't. He's able to hear things that other people can. Now, Kits, I'm really interested in what you said. You said that Galadriel creeps you out. I kind of want to know why. Is it because of the movie? Because she had that one scene in the movie that was kind of creepy. But or is there another reason why Galadriel creeps you out? But yeah, Legolas is seeing, he knows what's going on. His eyes see further than his eyes see, is what I'm getting at. He knows, he says, hey, they wouldn't have come. They wouldn't have been able to come because they're being attacked. They're not marching to the war is marching to them. So he's sort of aware of more than we think he's aware of. I'm really interested, let me drink some water before I continue. I am really interested to hear why Galadriel creeps Kits out. That's sort of an Éomer thing to say, you know? For a while the three companions walked together, speaking of this and that turn of the battle, and they went down from the broken gate and past the mounds of the fallen on the green sward beside the road, until they stood on Helm's Dyke and looked into the coombe. The Death Down already stood there, black and tall and stony, and the great trampling and scoring of the grass by the Hurons could be plainly see. The Dunlendings and many men of the garrison of the burg were at work on the dyke or in the fields about the battered walls behind, yet all seemed strangely quiet, a weary valley resting after a great storm. Soon they turned back and went to the midday meal in the hall of the burg. The king was already there, and as soon as they entered, he called for Merry, and had a seat for him at his side. "It is not as I would have it," said Theoden, "for this is little like my fair house in Edoras, and your friend is gone, who should also be here. But it may be long ere we sit, you and I, at the high table in Meadowsell. There will be no time for feasting when I return thither. But come now, eat and drink, and let us speak together while we may, and then you shall ride with me." "May I?" said Merry, surprised and delighted. "That would be splendid." He had never felt more grateful for any kindness in words. "I am afraid I am only in everybody's way," he stammered. "But I should like to do anything I could, you know." "I doubt it not," said the king. "I have had a good hill pony made ready for you. He will bear you as swift as any horse by the roads that we shall take. For I will ride from the burg by mountain path, not by the plain, and so come to Edoras by way of Dunharrow, where the Lady Éowyn awaits me. You shall be my esquire if you will. Is there gear of war in this place, Éomer, that my sword thane could use?" "There are no great weapon hoards here, lord," answered Éomer. "Maybe a light helm might be found to fit him, but we have no mail or sword for one of his stature." "I have a sword," said Merry, climbing from his seat, and drawing from its black sheath the small bright blade. Filled suddenly with love for this old man, he knelt on one knee and took his hand and kissed it. "May I lay the sword of Meriadoc of the Shire on your lap, Theoden king?" he cried. "Receive my service if you will." "Gladly will I take it," said the king, and laying his long old hands upon the brown hair of the hobbit, he blessed him. "Rise now, Meriadoc, esquire of Rohan of the household of Meadowseld," he said. "Take your sword and bear it into good fortune." "As a father you shall be to me," said Merry. "For a little while," said Theoden. It's difficult to put into words, so it's just a feeling. But what I really want to know is it something derived from the book or was it from the film? Because she was a little bit unnerving in the film, and that was very much on purpose. My favorite actual depiction of Galadriel was from the Ralph Bakshi version, actually. He got her right. So this is interesting. So we're seeing this parallel of Merry and Pippin. Pippin suddenly swearing his fealty to Denethor, and Merry swearing his fealty to Theoden. And of course, these things both turn out differently, but they also both turn out rather poorly, because Denethor dies, Theoden dies, and neither of these characters are making it very far. And here's the thing. Theoden knows he's not long for this world. Merry says, "You're going to be like a father to me," and he says, "Oh, for a little while. For a little while I'll be like your father." You know, he's not thinking, "I'm going to be like a father to you until this war is over and you go back to your home country." He knows he's riding to his death. He says, I'm going to go home to Meduseld. I'm going to take the hard road there. We're going to muster. We're going to ride on Minas Tirith. We're going to fulfill our duty, and we're probably all going to die. And he has no fear of it, you know? He has absolutely no fear of it. He's fully willing to go into this. But yeah, there we have it. Let's move onwards here. They talked then together as they ate, until presently Eomer spoke. It is near the hour that we have set for our going, lord, he said. Shall I bid men to sound the horns? But where is Aragorn? His place is empty, and he is not eaten. We will make ready to ride, said Theoden, but let word be sent to the Lord Aragorn that the hour is nigh. The king with his guard, and Merry at his side, passed down from the gate of the burg to where the riders were assembling on the green. Many were already mounted. It would be a great company, for the king was leaving only a small garrison in the burg, and all who could be spared were riding to the weapon take at Edoras. 1,000 spears had indeed already ridden away at night. But there would still be some 500 more to go with the king, for the most part men from the fields with Dales and Westfold. It's the casual nature that she reads people's minds, apparently without their knowledge or consent. No, they do know of it. They know of it and they feel it. And actually, see, what she's using, the power that she's using is the Asanrakanta, which is exchange of thoughts. Consent is mandatory. You actually can't force your way into somebody's mind and read their thoughts. Return of the king, but Elvis left the building. You know, well, let me tell you something. The films definitely made it seem like she was invading their minds, so I do understand that. Especially with the description that Sam had of what it felt like. Moogle, I saw something on Facebook just the other day. It was from a music page. You know, I love music, and it said, "What is your musical opinion that you have that would get you canceled by some people?" And I said, the fact that they called Elvis the king of rock and roll was a travesty, because you know, we had Roy Orbison. He was better, and he wrote his own songs. I was like, oh boy. I hope there's not any really big Elvis fans that are going to see that and get angry with me. All right. Let's continue onwards here. A little apart the rangers sat, silent in an ordered company, armed with spear and bow and sword. They were clad in cloaks of dark grey, and their hoods were cast now over the helm and head. Their horses were strong, and of proud bearing, but rough-haired, and one stood there without a rider, Aragorn's own horse, that they had brought from the north. Rohirrim was his name. There was no gleam of stone or gold, nor any fair thing in all their gear and harness, nor did their riders bear any badge or token, save only that each cloak was pinned upon the left shoulder by a brooch of silver shaped like a rayed star. The king mounted his horse, Snowmane, and Merry sat beside him on his pony. Stibba was his name. Presently Eomer came out from the gate, and with him was Aragorn and Halbarad bearing the great staff close-furled and black, and 2 tall men, neither young nor old. So much alike they were, the sons of Elrond, that few could tell them apart, dark-haired, grey-eyed, and their faces elven fair, clad alike in bright mail beneath cloaks of silver grey. Behind them walked Legolas and Gimli. But Merry had eyes only for Aragorn, so startling was the change that he saw in him. As if in one night many years had fallen on his head, grim was his face, grey-hued and weary. "I am troubled in mind, lord," he said, standing by the king's horse. "I have heard strange words, and I see new perils far off. I have laboured long in thought, and now I fear I must change my purpose. Tell me, Theoden, you ride now to Dunharrow. How long will it be ere you come here?" "It is now full hour past noon," said Eomer. "Before the night of the 3rd day from now we should come to the hold. The moon will then be nigh past his full. And the muster that the king commanded will be held the day after. More speed we cannot make if the strength of Rohan is to be gathered." CW trade. How's it going? How dare you? Yeah, I mean it is. I mean, I'm not going to knock Elvis as a singer, as a performer, a dancer, or any of that. But he didn't write a thing. You know what I mean? And then when you have Roy Orbison, I think was a better singer and had more interesting songs. But I had a lot of thoughts as to. I have a lot of hot takes that I could have said for the history of rock and roll, certainly, but I mean, I could have went after the Rolling Stones pretty hard, but I chose Elvis as my target. All right. Now I wanted to mention this. So this is where we see that, Mary's talking to the king and Mary's talking to his friends, and then everybody's sort of looking around. They're eating and they're like, "Where's Aragorn?" I see Elrond's sons and that Halbarad guy and the 30-odd dudes that came with him. His horse is standing there. Where's he? And then finally he shows up, and Mary's like, "Whoa, this guy looks very different." Suddenly he looks older, and some people have misinterpreted this to mean that Aragorn has aged a whole lot all at once. And that's not entirely accurate. But he has been through an ordeal that he's not going to speak of until later, and it has made him very weary, and now he's a little bit afraid too. He's a little rattled. And now we're seeing a little bit of his age, because he is 88 years old, and even though for a man of his race that's middle aged, he's been through a lot. It's he might be the equivalent of 40 years old, but it's a hard 40. You know what I mean? It's like when you look at pictures and you see some balding, wrinkled fellow with tired eyes, and it says, "This is, such and such, 35 years old," right? And you see because in the past, when people were really going through a lot of physical stress, they would age quickly. And Aragorn has been through a lot of physical stress. He's been dealing with this situation for 68 years at this point. You know what I mean? So it's been rough on him. But basically, he's not going to talk about it till later. But where was Aragorn? Why did he miss the lunch that they were going to have? Why wasn't he with Merry and Theoden and all these people? And why does he come back with sort of a 1,000-yard stare? It's because he was looking into the Palantir. And he's not going to talk about it until later. Gimli and Legolas are going to get it out of him. But he was looking into the Palantir. And obviously what he saw was incredibly stressful for him and incredibly timely for him. Also, excellent point that Kit's brought up. If you don't sleep for a few days, you start to look really rough. And it was mentioned by Legolas, I don't think Aragorn slept. I don't think he slept yet. Aragorn at this point, he's sort of like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I've got work to do. There's so much to be done. But it was just a little while ago, just a few hours in this time, right before Merry's nap, he didn't really get a good sleep, he had a nap, that he was told, if your time grows short, you must take the paths of the dead. And that was the message from Elrond. And then he gets a message from Arwen, your time is short. And then he looks into the Palantir and he sees the Corsairs of Umbar. And he actually communed with Sauron. We'll talk about that later when he describes it. We'll talk about it in more detail. But that's why he's so rattled all of a sudden. That's where he was. Let's continue here. Aragorn was silent for a moment. 3 days, he murmured. And the muster of Rohan will only be begun. But I see that it cannot now be hastened. He looked up, and it seemed that he made some decision. His face was less troubled. Then, by your leave, Lord, I must take new counsel for myself and my kindred. We must ride our own road, and no longer in secret. For the time of stealth is past. I will ride east by the swiftest way, and I will take the paths of the dead The paths of the dead, said Theoden, and trembled. Why do you speak of them? Éomer turned and gazed at Aragorn, and it seemed to Merry that the faces of the riders that sat within hearing turned pale at the words. If there be truth such paths, said Theoden, their gate is in Dunharrow, and no living man may pass it. Alas, Aragorn, my friend, said Éomer, I had hoped that we should ride to war together. But if you seek the paths of the dead, then our parting is come, and it is little likely that we shall ever meet again under the sun. That road I will take none the less, said Aragorn. But I say to you, Éomer, that in battle we may yet meet again, though all the hosts of Mordor should stand between. Aragorn making another prophecy. We're going to meet in battle with all the hosts of Mordor standing between us. And then if you cast your mind forward to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, what happens when Aragorn arrives in those black ships? He starts cleaving his way through one direction, and what is happening on the very opposite side, all the way on the other side of Sauron's army, Éomer goes into a berserker rage and starts cleaving his way in the other direction until he meets Aragorn at the center, and that's when we know that they've won. So he's saying, yeah, we're going to meet, but Sauron's army is going to be between us, and we're going to take them out from either side. So, once again, another little prophecy. Even if he doesn't even know, I don't think he knows he's making a prophecy. I think he's just saying what he thinks, and I don't think he just says his feelings, Aragorn. He says his feelings, and he makes prophecies, and I don't know if he's consciously doing it. I don't think he's trying to see the future. I think he's just saying his feelings, but they turn out to be prophetic feelings. You will do as you will, my lord Aragorn, said Theoden. It is your doom, maybe, to tread strange paths that others dare not. This parting grieves me, and my strength is lessened by it. But now I must take the mountain roads and delay no longer. Farewell. Farewell, lord, said Aragorn. Ride unto great renown. Farewell, Merry. I leave you in good hands, better than we hoped when we hunted the orcs to Fangorn. Legolas and Gimli will still hunt with me, I hope, but we shall not forget you. Goodbye, said Merry. He could find no more to say. He felt very small, and he was puzzled and depressed by all these gloomy words. More than ever he missed the unquenchable cheerfulness of Pippin. The riders were ready, and their horses were fidgeting. He wished that they would start and get it over. Now Theoden spoke to Éomer, and he lifted up his hand and cried aloud, and with that word the riders set forth. They rode over the dike and down the coombe, and then, turning swiftly eastward, they took a path that skirted the foothills for a mile or so, until bending south it passed back among the hills and disappeared from view. Aragorn rode to the dike and watched till the king's men were far down the coombe. Then he turned to Halbarad. There go three that I love, and the smallest not the least, he said. He knows not to what end he rides, yet if he knew, he still would go on. A little people, but of great worth, are the Shire folk, said Halbarad. Little do they know of our long labour for the safe keeping of their borders, and yet I grudge it not. And now our fates are woven together, said Aragorn. And yet, alas, here we must part. Well, I must eat a little, and then we also must hasten away. Come, Legolas and Gimli, I must speak with you as I eat. Together they went back into the burg, yet for some time Aragorn sat silent at the table in the hall, and the others waited for him to speak. Come, said Legolas at last, speak and be comforted and shake off that shadow. What has happened since we came back to this grim place in the grey morning? A struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the battle of the Hornburg, answered Aragorn. I have looked into the stone of Orthanc, my friends. Hey, Chewie. So here it is. Now, like I said, Legolas and Gimli get it out of him. He's going to say, hey, yeah, I looked into the Palantir. The thing that almost drove Pippin insane. I looked into it. I did the thing, And what's really interesting here is that we see... oh, dear, what's happening? Oh, no, it looks like we're having technical issues. Hold on. I need to look at the router. Are we good? No, I don't think we're good. Huh. All right, let's pause and see if I can get this working properly. I need a proper bookmark. Let's see if I can figure out what's going on here. Okay, so it's not my internet. My internet is connected. That's what I thought. Let me check on my phone, actually. Now, the internet's working. Are we good? No, we're not. It says I'm completely offline. Well, what about YouTube? Hold on, let's see. What is going on here? Oh, yeah. Unbelievable. Okay, let's see. Are we live? Did it work? Let's see if that worked. Unbelievable. It looks like it might have actually worked. Okay, let's see. Are we live? Did it work? Yeah. Wow, it actually worked. Multi-streaming is a problem again all of a sudden. All right, let me send the URL for YouTube over to Twitch. And hopefully this works. Let me make a post on YouTube saying, "Hey, we're here. We're live, and it's a different URL." I just unbelievable that happened to me. Unbelievable. Let's see. Yeah, let me make a post. We're here. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. The only thing is I can't see the chat right now. Should we just... What raid... Okay. Hey, Ted. I see Ted. I don't know what to say. It was crazy. My internet went down for like a second, and after that I couldn't get... Twitch was behaving very poorly, and YouTube even worse. Suddenly I can't multi-stream anymore, but I've got YouTube up. I don't even know what to say at this point, but let's try to at least finish the chapter that we're on, and then we'll call it a day there, I think. I'll have to edit together the pieces of it into a video instead of it being in the live, which I don't like doing that, but that's what we're going to have to do. I thought we were past the point of multi-streaming being a problem, but not so much. All right. Let me post on Discord real quick. Okay. There we go. I just everybody that was here, I would like to hopefully that they would come back, but YouTube is just terrible the way that they handle this. You see, on Twitch, if somebody's stream goes down for whatever reason and it comes back up, it just starts again. You don't have to do anything. But thank you, Joe Quake. But now everybody that was over at the YouTube stream, it was like 30 people. It just ended and shunted them to a different part of YouTube. And now hopefully they see the alert and the post and everything that I've gone live at a different, but the URL is different, and this is just a fine mess we've gotten ourselves into, Mr. Bilbo. All right, where's the book? There it is. Okay, let's try to... this is the plan. We're going to get through the chapter that we were on, which is the passing of the Grey Company, which is not a long chapter, and then we're going to stop for the day. Unfortunately, because this has already become a headache, and I have to think about... I have to edit this together, and next, oh God, I won't be able to do another reading stream until the 14th of May, so, you know, that's one of those things. But yeah, we had all these people come by, and everybody was talking and everything, and then, of course, this happens, and they don't know whether we're live or not. They don't know where we are, so... I just really wish that we could take the good parts of YouTube and the good parts of Twitch and put them together and discard all the bad parts. We're back. Hey, Brian. We're half there. Yeah, we're half here. Well, I mean, there's like 6 people here. We had over 30. So, you know, we're a quarter of the way there, you know? It's just, it is what it is, right? It always seems like when these things happen when everything's going real well. Okay, it just jumped up to 10. Looks like people are finding us. People are finding us. Unfortunately, like I said, I was hoping to get more than one chapter in, because the passing of the Grey Company is not a very long chapter, and then there's the Muster of Rohan, which is not a particularly long chapter. Siege of Gondor is a bit longer, you know, and the Ride of the Rohirrim, but... You know, but I think that we're only going to have to finish this chapter that we're on so that we can find a logical endpoint, and then we will stop there. I don't know what happened. It's like my internet blipped for a moment. Both streams went down. And when I tried to reconnect, Twitch reconnected, but at a really poor quality. And then YouTube reconnected for just like a brief moment, like a few seconds at a time, and then it would drop. But the problem is I'm getting no feedback. I was not dropping any frames. I was not told that anything was disconnected, except by, you know, the chat. So just, I don't know. I've had the issue before where multi-streaming is a problem. Hey, Matthew. I've had the problem where, you know, multi-streaming is a problem, and I would only be able to do one or the other, which is, you know, unfortunate because I do pay for the ability of multi-streaming. And me and Alice actually managed to find the settings to make it work again, and it's worked wonderfully, but unfortunately it stopped working. Now, I'm going to back up a bit because I'm not sure exactly where I was when we stopped. I know where I was, but I don't know what the last thing you guys heard was. So I'm going to back up a little bit, because I had a lot to say about what Aragorn was talking about, and then it was like, oh, you know, stream's gone down, there's a problem, it's buffering, Houston, we have a problem, all the different messages started rolling in, not just on YouTube, but also on Twitch, so big problems were happening. Unfortunately. Now, I am monitoring the stream. I do see myself, so I know that it's working. I was monitoring it before, but I was looking at the book. So. But I noticed that, yeah, it stopped. But here we go. Let's start. I'm going to start from the discussion here. between Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, and we'll talk about the Palantir. But we'll also talk about well, we're mostly going to talk about the Palantir, but also we're going to talk a little bit about Gandalf, actually, even though he's not in this scene. But let's start here. There go three that I love, and the smallest not the least, he said. He knows not to what end he rides, yet if he knew, he still would go on. A little people, but of great worth are the Shire folk, said Halbarad. Little do they know of our long labour for the safe keeping of their borders, yet I grudge it not. And now our fates are woven together, said Aragorn. And yet, alas, here we must part. Well, I must eat a little, and then we must also hasten away. Come, Legolas and Gimli, I must speak with you as I eat. Together they went back into the burg. Yet for some time Aragorn sat silent at the table in the hall, and the others waited for him to speak. Come, said Legolas at last, speak and be comforted and shake off the shadow. What has happened since we came back to this grim place in the grey morning? Kit's found his way back, that's good to hear. I'm sorry, I don't know quite what happened. A struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the Battle of Hornburg, answered Aragorn. I have looked into the Stone of Orthanc, my friends. All right. Now, this is where I stopped, and I started to talk about it, and that's when everything went haywire. Let's talk about that. So first off, this is where, like I said, Legolas and Gimli would get it out of him that he did look into the Palantir, and that he saw bad things. And he's going to talk about it a little bit here, and why it was such a bitter struggle for him. But he said something really interesting that makes me think of Gandalf. He said, and I'm going to read the exact phrase again, a struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the Battle of the Hornburg. So basically, he is saying that in looking into the Palantir, in communing with Sauron, and in seeing the ships of the Corsairs, that was a more difficult thing for him to do. It was harder than the Battle of Helm's Deep. And we see this a lot where the sort of spiritual struggles, or sometimes not just spiritual struggles, but mental struggles, or sometimes interpersonal struggles, are far more difficult and taxing on a person than battle is, than war is, And I'm going to draw your attention to something that Gandalf said in Unfinished Tales. He said that the most difficult thing that he did in Middle-earth was convince Bilbo to give up the ring. And this is, by the way, this is in a story called The Quest for Erebor, and it's taking place before the end of The Lord of the Rings, but after the fall of Sauron. Basically, it's somewhere after the chapter The Field of Cormallen, and when Frodo and Merry and Sam and Gimli and Gandalf are all in Minas Tirith, and Aragorn is the king, and they're just sort of debriefing each other and exchanging notes, and Gandalf talks mostly about Bilbo, and that's why it's called The Quest for Erebor, because it recontextualizes the Hobbit story. But he said, but I just want to point out, so he says the most difficult thing that he's ever had to do in Middle-earth was convincing Bilbo to give up the ring. And this includes the fact that he faced a Balrog and literally died after battling the Balrog for 11 days. When he was already tired, because when he knew it was a Balrog, when Legolas said that it was a Balrog, he said, I am already weary. So he was already very tired from the trek through Moria, and then he had to fight this thing for 11 days, and not just in one place, but he had to chase it all over the place, all over the very bowels below Moria, and up the Great Stair, and up the mountain to its very peak. 11 days of constant running and fighting, and then to die and be resurrected, and to lay there fully naked in the snow while your body slowly puts itself back together, and then to have Gwaihir come and grab you, not riding on his back, but scooped into his claws and borne away to Lothlorien, which for Gandalf was a frightening and I would say disorienting experience that he had. But he still says the hardest thing he ever had to do was convince Bilbo to give up the ring, which is an interpersonal conflict, not a battle of, not even a battle with Bilbo, but finding the right words to do the impossible. I believe he used the word task. Let's look, actually. Well, if you ever find that question, Kits, I'd be happy to handle it. Because it wasn't a decision to urge Bilbo to give up the ring. It was a task. But let's look at what the exact words were. Let's see. Well, here's the beginning of the story. Well, he knew he had to intervene. That's the thing. That's not the beginning. That's the beginning of it. I might have to go to my digital copy because it would be faster to search for it there. Let's see. Yeah, let me use my digital copy. Be faster to find it. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's the folder. Let's look at it. Here's Unfinished Tales. The problem is I'm searching for the word difficult, but Christopher uses that a lot to talk about how hard it was to put Unfinished Tales together. Okay, that's the second most difficult thing, which I was going to bring that up. Maybe it wasn't the word difficult that he used, but we might have to talk about it more when we read Unfinished Tales. But I wanna answer what you said there. You know. All right, I can't look at that. It's just giving me a headache. Let me look. Let me use the actual book. I think I'll have more success there. I shouldn't have changed text there at all. That's the Hunt for the Ring. That's not what I'm looking for. Because he says the second most difficult thing that he had to do in Middle-earth was convincing Thorin to take Bilbo. Which is interesting. It means the two most difficult things that he had to do, more so than battling the Balrog, both had to do with Bilbo. Which I think is pretty funny. Bilbo and Thorin were huge pains in the butt for Gandalf in general. Here we are, Quest for Erebor. Let's see. You know, for the life of me, I can't find it. I reference this all the time, too. And if any of you have a copy of Unfinished Tales, and you find it before I do, let me know what page. Because unfortunately, the Quest for Erebor is a big section, and there's multiple versions of it. So that's kind of what makes it a little more difficult to find one specific passage. Well, it's not. It's certainly not going to be in version A because version A is really short. You know, it's got to be version B. I think I'm thinking of two different stories, though, is the problem. This is the Thorin one. I can't find it. My recollection was that he said the most difficult task that he performed in Middle Earth. Let me try something else real quick before we move on from that. I'm searching through my own writings at this point. So now I've quoted this before. Why can't I find it? I'm just having a normal one today, huh? All right, one more attempt here, and then I have to move on because at this point we've wasted a lot of time here. Ah, found it. What he said was, it was the most difficult part of the whole affair. And that was talking about Thorin. There's another moment where he talks because that affair being the Hobbit, but there's another moment where he talks about. He says the most difficult part. I guess that's. And then there's another moment where he says the most difficult part of the Lord of the Rings for him was convincing Bilbo to give up the ring. That I can't seem to find, but there you have it. So it's not, difficult to say. The most difficult part. That was the actual phrase there. Now where did I put the Return of the King? I'm sorry, guys. I'm just having a very rough time of it today. But like I'm saying, what Aragorn here is saying, though, is very reminiscent of that. That he is comparing, looking into the Palantir as grimmer than the Battle of Helm's Deep. And I just want you to consider. Grimmer is a really interesting word. Nobody died. Nobody was killed. Nothing was lost, right? As a matter of fact, Aragorn doesn't realize it yet, but he has gained a huge advantage over Sauron. And he has essentially saved Frodo and the quest. He's just thinking, now I have to hurry. because those ships are coming to the Bay of Pelargir, and I have to get there and intervene them. And that's very true. And he also wrested control of the Palantir from Sauron, and that's really, really important as well. However, the part that he doesn't even realize that's so important is that now Sauron thinks he has the ring. Because if we see this from Sauron's perspective, he knows what Saruman was up to. He knows that Saruman wants the ring for himself. One day, his Palantir lights up, and it's a hobbit, a halfling. And Sauron jumps to the conclusion that it's the ring bearer and that Saruman has captured him. Of course, it's Pippin. It's not Frodo, it's Pippin. And then he sends one of his Nazgul to Isengard, and there's no hobbit, there's no ring, there's no Palantir. The place is destroyed. You know. So clearly something has happened. And his thinking is that this ring bearer, and therefore also the ring, has gone into other hands. And then suddenly he's contacted by this tall Númenorian fellow who shows him the Sword of Elendil and basically is declaring himself the king of Gondor. And now Sauron's thinking this guy has the ring. So now he's going to put everything into attacking Gondor, and that's what's going to allow Frodo to fulfill his part of the quest and destroy the ring. Of course, Frodo doesn't actually destroy the ring, and we'll talk more about that later. So Aragorn has gained so much from this and lost not a lot. He's stressed out. It was difficult. It's made him weary. It's made him tired. It's made him haggard. But he's gained so much more than he's lost. And he's still saying that the struggle, though, to get that was, for him at least, grimmer than the Battle of Helm's Deep. And I could kind of like come down on Aragorn a little here and say, well, it's because he didn't do much at Helm's Deep. He mostly babysat Theoden, talked to the orcs, you know. They did one last big ride out at the end, you know, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting, and it does remind me of Gandalf. It's sometimes in this case, it was a spiritual struggle. In some cases, it's an interpersonal struggle. But really what it comes down to, and this is true, is that it's so much easier to fight someone than it is to change their heart. You know what I mean? It's so much easier if someone is doing something that you don't like, or they're not doing something that you think they should be doing. Convincing them into your way of thinking could be the most difficult thing that you could ever do. Just punching their lights out is easier. You know, it's the easy road. And I think that's the point that Tolkien is making here with Aragorn, and he made it with Gandalf a few times, actually. And he made it with Bilbo, absolutely, a bunch of times. It's sometimes, changing hearts and minds, incredibly difficult, especially when you're dealing with people who are carrying the One Ring, or you're dealing with people like Thorin who are incredibly stubborn. You know, when we analyze Unfinished Tales, we'll go more into that, but I really wanted to pause and talk about that. Let's continue now. "You have looked into that accursed stone of wizardry," exclaimed Gimli with fear and astonishment in his face. "Did you say aught to him? Even Gandalf feared that encounter." I'm turning into Gandalf. "Even Gandalf feared that encounter." "You forget to whom you speak," said Aragorn sternly, and his eyes glinted. "What do you fear that I should say to him? Did I not openly proclaim my title before the doors of Edoras? Nay, Gimli," he said in a softer voice, and the grimness left his face, and he looked like one who has laboured in sleepless pain for many nights. "Nay, my friends, I am the lawful master of the stone, and I had both the right and the strength to use it, or so I judged. The right cannot be doubted. The strength was enough. Barely. He drew a deep breath. It was a bitter struggle, and the weariness is slow to pass. I spoke no word to him, and in the end I wrenched the stone to my own will. That alone he will find hard to endure. And he beheld me, yes, Master Gimli, he saw me, but in other guise than you see me. Here. If that will aid him, then I have done ill, but I do not think so. To know that I have lived and walked the earth was a blow to his heart, I deem, for he knew it not till now. The eyes in Orthanc did not see through the armour of Theoden, but Sauron has not forgotten Isildur and the sword of Elendil. Now, in the very hour of his great designs, the heir of Isildur and the sword are revealed, for I showed the blade reforged to him. He is not so mighty yet that he is above fear, nay, doubt ever gnaws at him. But he wields great dominion none the less, said Gimli, and now he will strike more swiftly. The hasty stroke goes oft astray, said Aragorn. We must press our enemy, and no longer wait upon him for the move. See, my friends, when I had mastered the stone, I learned many things. A grave peril I saw coming unlooked for upon Gondor from the south that will draw off great strength from the defence of Minas Tirith. If it is not countered swiftly, I deem that the city will be lost ere 10 days be gone. What does he mean by in other guys? Actually, what's interesting is I actually answered that in a formal... I can't talk today. I wrote an article about that not too long ago. Let me bring that up for you, actually. Let's see, because it's actually really interesting. And I'm glad you asked about that, Joe. Let me bring that up. I wrote about this really not that far along. Let's see. Here we are. So, this was something that, a question that I got 10 months ago. Let's see, who asked me this? This was from a fellow named Curtis W. Sissons. And he asked the same question. When Aragorn wrested control of the Palantir from Sauron, he told Gimli, yes, he beheld me, but in other guise than you see me here. So in what guise did Aragorn appear to Sauron? And I'm just going to read you exactly what I wrote 10 months ago, because that's easier for me than to just belch it up. There are moments, and they become more frequent, where Aragorn is seen as his true self and not the dirty tramp that he presents himself as. Keep in mind that to most of the focal characters, Aragorn is a ranger named Strider who is disheveled. He's covered from head to toe in nicks and cuts, and he's caked in grime. He cleans up nice, as we first saw in Rivendell, but this was just clean Strider. It was not so much Aragorn II, Elisar Telcontar, High King of the Dunedain of the Reunited Kingdom. Sometimes characters are afforded different vision. We see this with Sam. He sees Frodo as a mysterious white-robed figure holding a wheel of fire to his breast. We are told that Legolas sees Aragorn's eyes burning with a spectral flame at one point. We also see it with Gandalf. He occasionally unleashes a little bit of his true self for effect, suddenly seeming impossibly tall and with a booming voice that darkens the space around him. So what Aragorn is saying is that Sauron got a glimpse of Aragorn not as this very tired adventurer from the north, but as the heir of Elendil carrying tokens of Telchar and Celebrimbor to Sauron. He was a hero, the likes of which had not been seen since the elder days. So, and going back to the book and to what Aragorn said here, I'm just going to read that little bit again here. He has not forgotten Isildur and the sword of Elendil. So basically, when he sees Aragorn, he's not seeing him like Gimli sees him, as this guy who's really worn down and has been through so much. He's not seeing him like Legolas has seen him, my friend who hasn't slept for 10 days. He sees him as the king. He sees him as something that he has feared would happen, but wasn't sure whether or not it happened, because any time that, like he's spoken about it in the past, the enemy is after me, the enemy knows of me, the enemy knows Strider, the enemy knows Thorongil, the enemy doesn't really know Aragorn. So what he's saying is that Sauron saw him as he is meant to be, as Legolas occasionally sees him. Frodo actually saw him like that at one point in the Fellowship of the Ring, right when they passed between the two statues, the Argonath. The statue was of Isildur and Anarion. In the movie, it was like, for some reason, it was Elendil and Isildur. Not sure what that was all about, but sometimes you see a person in a different way or as they truly are, or you're seeing kind of like their Fea, which is their soul, their spirit, which is the way that Sam occasionally sees Frodo, the way that Gandalf looks at Frodo when he has been through being stabbed by a Morgul blade, and he sees Frodo differently. So that's what it is. I'm glad you asked that, because I probably wasn't going to talk about it, and I was like, oh yeah, we should talk about that, shouldn't we? We should talk about that. Let's continue here now. Then lost it must be, said Gimli. For what help is there to send thither, and how could it come there in time? I have no help to send, therefore I must go myself, said Aragorn. But there is only one way through the mountains that will bring me to the coastlands before all is lost. That is the paths of the dead. Absolutely. That's exactly what I meant, yeah. The paths of the dead, said Gimli. It is a fell name, and little to the liking to the men of Rohan, as I saw. Can the living use such a road and not perish? And even if you pass that way, what will so few avail to counter the strokes of Mordor? The living have never used that road since the coming of the Rohirrim, said Aragorn, for it is closed to them. But in this dark hour the heir of Isildur may use it if he dare. Listen! This is the word that the sons of Elrond bring to me from their father in Rivendell, wisest in lore. Bid Aragorn remember the words of the seer and the paths of the dead. And what may be the words of the seer? Asked Legolas. Hey there, Brian. How's it going? Thus spoke Malbeth the seer in the days of Arvedui, last king at Fornost, said Aragorn. All right, I'm going to read that, but let me talk about that line. Malbeth the seer is an interesting one. Malbeth has made a lot of prophecies, and a lot of them are about Aragorn. As a matter of fact, when I talk about how many prophecies that Aragorn has fulfilled when he becomes the king, or does fulfill in his road to becoming the king, a lot of them are made by Malbeth. He mentions Arvedui, the last king at Fornost. Fornost is a tower that is to the north of Bree, and that was where the king of Arthedain was. And that was also where the kings of Arnor were before that. Arthedain was one of the three states that Arnor sort of splintered off into to avoid a civil war. Now, Arvedui himself is a really interesting figure, because Arvedui wanted to become the king of Gondor. He was already the king of Arnor, and he wanted to become the king of Gondor. He wanted to bring Elendil's realm together. Gondor, at this point, had been without a king for quite some time. The two realms, Arnor in the north, Gondor in the south, they had been separate for a long time with their own kings. And now he's like looking down at the Southlands, and he's saying Gondor hasn't had a king in quite a while. Maybe it's time to reunite the kingdoms. Elendil never meant for them to be two separate things. He meant for them to be, for Arnor to have a king and for Gondor to have a king, but for there to be a high king above them that ruled this one united land, the kingdom of the Dunedain. And so he went down and he said, hey, I'm the heir of Isildur, and I want to be the king. And they told him no. I told him no. They said, you're Isildur, we don't consider him to have been a king of Gondor. We consider him to have been a king of Arnor. You're not descended from Anarion. And he says, well, that's true. I'm not descended from Anarion. But my wife is descended from Anarion. and she should be the queen of Gondor, don't you think? And their answer was, well, we don't allow women to rule. And he says, why? Numenor did. And they didn't have an answer for that. But the Council of Gondor rejected his bid, and, they were urged to do so by the steward, and he didn't become the king. But what was interesting was that you have an heir of Isildur who's married to an heir of Anarion, and now his descendant, Aragorn, is both. Now, here's the thing. It's still a little shaky, and this is why Aragorn needs to go through all of these prophecies and to win all the hearts and minds and to do all this very difficult stuff to become the king. Because Denethor is aware of him. Denethor knows what he's all about. And the issue that is that Denethor is not going to let Aragorn be the king. The only way that Aragorn ever becomes the king is Denethor dies. It's the only way that happens. And that is what happens because the steward has to recognize him. Denethor doesn't recognize him, and he even says it or he will say it to Gandalf at one point. This guy is only descended through Isildur's line, and he's only descended from Anarion by a broken male line. There's a woman in there, so I'm not gonna give up my power. I'm not going to do that, right? And that's going to be the thing. Of course, Faramir doesn't have that issue. Faramir is just like my king, So that's where it's lucky for Aragorn, especially since Aragorn heals Faramir and saves his life, and that's really important as well. And Malbeth Asir is also the one who made the prophecy that the hands of the king are healing hands, so that's a whole other thing. So like I said, that's just that one line. Thus spoke Malbeth Asir in the days of Arvedri, the last king of Fornost, is just packed full of really fun information, really interesting information. Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles to the tomb of kings. Doom approaches, the dead awaken. For the hour is come for the oath breakers. At the stone of Eric they shall stand again, and hear there a horn in the hills ringing. Who shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the grey twilight, the forgotten people? The heir of him to whom the oath they swore, from the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door to the paths of the dead. Dark days, doubtless, said Gimli, but no darker than these staves are to me. If you would understand them better, then I bid you come with me, said Aragorn. For that way I now shall take. But I do not go gladly, only need drives me. Therefore only of your free will would I have you come, for you will find both toil and great fear, and maybe worse. I will go with you, even on the paths of the dead, and to whatever end they may lead, said Gimli. I will also come, said Legolas, for I do not fear the dead. I hope that the forgotten people will not have forgotten how to fight, said Gimli, for otherwise I see not why we should trouble them. That we shall know, if we ever come to Eric, said Aragorn. But the oath that they broke was to fight against Sauron, and they must fight therefore if they are to fulfill it. For at Eric there stands yet a black stone that was brought, it was said, from Numenor by Isildur. And it was set upon a hill, and it was upon it that the king of the mountains swore allegiance to him at the beginning of the realm of Gondor. But when Sauron returned and grew in might again, Isildur summoned the men of the mountain to fulfill their oath, and they would not, for they had worshipped Sauron in the dark years. Then Isildur said to their king, Thou shalt be the last king. And if the west prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. For this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end. And they fled before the wrath of Isildur, and did not dare go forth to war on Sauron's part, and they hid themselves in secret places, in the mountains, and had no dealings with other men, but slowly dwindled in the barren hills, and the terror of the sleepless dead lie upon... Let's try that again. And the terror of the sleepless dead lies about the hill of Eric, and all places where that people lingered. but that way I must go, since they are none living to help me. He stood up. Come, he cried, and drew his sword, and it flashed in the twilit hall of the burg. To the stone of Eric I seek the paths of the dead. Come with me who will. Legolas and Gimli made no answer, but they rose and followed Aragorn from the hall. On the green there waited still and silent the hooded rangers. Legolas and Gimli mounted. Aragorn sprang upon Rohirrim. Then Halbarad lifted a great horn, and the blast of it echoed in Helm's Deep. And with that they leaped away, riding down the coombe like thunder, while all the men that were left on the dike or burg stared in amaze. Yeah, he's not afraid of dead things. He's just like, oh, it's just ghosts, bodies, whatever. I don't care about that, right? Now, what's really interesting, we have to talk about the film, right? The film screwed this part up a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean a lot. It was still really cool, but it was so wrong-headed because, it was like Aragorn wanted to go alone, and Gimli and Legolas basically had to force their company onto him. I'm going to talk about that, Joe. Don't worry, I'm coming back to that. I will come back to that after I talk about how the film got it wrong. So, and I will talk about the Stone of Eric. Absolutely, I will talk about the Stone of Eric. That's another really big thing that I need to talk about, Muddle. Anyway, what we're looking at here is, in the film, it's like Aragorn's like, I got to go by myself. First of all, he doesn't even know about it. Elrond has to show up in person, give him his sword, not sure why he didn't have it the whole time, and then be told that he has to go through there. He's got to be pushed the whole way, basically. And then he doesn't want to go with anybody. Here he has Halbarad, and he has Gimli and Legolas, and he has like 30 other guys all willing to go with him. And he's even asking them, look, man, I can't tell you to do this. Oh, and Elrond's sons. I can't tell you to do this, but I'm asking you. And they're all like, let's go. Gimli, being the first to say, I'm going, is so different from the quivering mess they made Gimli in the films, who is so scared of ghosts that he was like the last one to enter there. So that's one thing that they definitely got wrong. The Stone of Eric is actually, it's a meteor is what it is. There's no other description for it other than it is a meteor, and we're going to talk about it a lot more when we read Unfinished Tales, because this goes into the founding of Rohan, and basically the Stone of Eric is considered sort of sacred, where as far as Gondor is concerned, because it's something that Isildur brought from Numenor, and that was basically something that came from the heavens. And remember that Isildur was one of the faithful, and that he did follow the Valar and Ilúvatar. So this was so like a gift from above, And so they're saying, this is really important to us culturally and significantly. This is what you are going to swear upon, and it is also the same stone that Cirion and Eorl swore their endless allegiance to each other on when Cirion, who was the steward of Gondor at the time, Eorl was the king of Rhovanion. He was the leader of the Eotheod, and he was a very young king. He was called Eorl the Young, and the Eotheod were these Northmen who were constantly helping Gondor out, and Gondor is dwindled and depopulated, and there's this whole region called Calenarthen that isn't really being used. And they said, you know what? Let's have you guys just live here. We're going to give you this land, and we're going to cede it to you, and it is going to be your own land, and you can be the king of it, and it's going to be separate from Gondor. And the only thing that I ask is that you're going to swear to always come to my aid if I ask, and that I'm going to swear to always come to your aid if you ask. And that's why it's so important, like, that Rohan helps Gondor in this war, because it's part of an eternal alliance. Now, Isildur doesn't have superpowers. He does not have the ability to lay a curse on people. But what he did was he knew that they were already a cursed people, and he was giving voice to it. Because when you take an oath like that, and that's a sacred oath with a capital O, there is one being that takes that extremely seriously, and that's Ilúvatar. And basically, it's not Isildur stopping them from dying. He doesn't have that ability. He's dead himself, in fact. He's not, I mean, they're dead, but they're not dead because they're in the world. They haven't passed away. They're just dead. So he knows the past. He knows the Silmarillion. He knows everything that happened with Feanor. And he knows that when you make an oath to the One or an oath to the Valar, you are compelled to see it through. And that's why we have characters. We talked about Maglor earlier. Maglor was probably the least terrible son of Feanor. He was the one that had the most regrets. Mathros, similar. And there were a lot of times where Mathros and Maglor were like, we don't want to kill people. We don't want to do all this. And their oath burned at them. Because Iluvatar is basically saying, you're not going to take my name in vain. Oh, no, he was the last to enter into the paths of the dead, but he was the first to volunteer to do so. It's just the reality of it hits him a little bit in that moment. But it's very different from the book from the movie rather, where he's sort of quivering and he only goes in to sort of like prove his superiority to Legolas, you know. Like I said, it's wrong-headed, is what I'm saying. The sequence of events is basically correct, but the philosophy behind it is not. You know, Gimli is so out of character in the entirety of the movies. I can't even think of a moment where Gimli's in character. I really can't. I can't think of a single moment where Gimli resembles the version of him from the book. I would love to see a lore accurate Gimli because he is one of my favorites, but it's just hasn't happened as of yet. Even like the Bakshi film didn't really get him right because he was barely in it. You know, he was a very minor character. It was still better, but it was not correct. You know, there's some characters that just haven't been done justice. He's one of them. But yeah, so it's Iluvatar that makes those decisions as to who gets to leave the world and who doesn't. And what Isildur is doing is he's throwing a scare into them because it was mentioned that it wasn't just that they were cowards that didn't want to go to war against Sauron, is that they were actually on Sauron's side. And so in saying that to them, and you have to remember Isildur was this extremely tall, extremely powerful man with a big presence. And when he started shouting, people listened and they got scared. And he said that he's cursing them. And that was a big tactic. A big tactic, because what did they do? They stayed out of the war because they were going to fight the war on Sauron's side. And now they were too afraid to do that. Now they're afraid of Isildur. You know, so basically that's what he was getting at. I mean, anybody could lay a curse on anything. I could point at someone and say, I curse you to have a floating butt over your head. It poops on you every 14 minutes. It's not actually going to happen, though. I don't have that power to do so. But if somebody believes that I have the power to do that, they might get kind of freaked out by it, right? So that's what it comes down to. If I was a scary enough individual to conjure up such images like that. Because if we go back to what he says, you know, to not rest until your oath is fulfilled, that has already happened. That door is already shut to them. They already are not going to be able to rest until their oath is fulfilled. Just like Mathros and Maglor were not able to rest until their oath was fulfilled. And a lot of people ask, like, because when Frodo said that he was going to take the ring to Mount Doom and destroy it, Elrond basically asked him to swear to do it. But he said, nobody else swears an oath. Because he knows, out of all people, he knows how powerful that sort of thing is. Even Sam wasn't into it. Can I talk a little bit more about what makes an oath divinely enforceable versus a more hollow oath. The glib answer is that when you see a capital O, you know it's a big deal. Oath with a capital O. But in reality, usually it involves invoking the name of the one Iluvatar. Usually that's what happens. In the case of the oath made between Cirion and Eorl, they swore it at Elendil's grave too. Let me bring that up actually, because there's a ritual that is done. You know what I mean? And when you invoke the Valar, or you invoke the One, which is Iluvatar or Eru, usually Iluvatar in Middle Earth. Eru is more of an Undying Lands thing. It's sort of like they're listening, and they will hold you to it. Let's see. Here we are. So here is the exact wording of the oath that Cirion and Eorl took. I'll read it in Quenya, and then I'll read it in English. Vanda sina termanva elanoreal alcarlayan arlendil vorona voronva. Nai tirvanta se harar malhamasan inumen, ayat eru, aya ilya malamare ea tenoya. So, in English, this oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and of the faithful of Elendil the faithful, in the keeping of those who sit upon the thrones of the west, and of the one who is above all thrones forever. So basically, the quick answer, I gave you the glib answer and I gave you the long answer. The quick answer is when you swear to God, then it's a sacred oath. You know. Of course, in real life, we have a saying, only liars swear, right? When somebody's, I swear, for real, you know, I don't know if I believe that. All right, let's continue along here, because it's already kind of late and we're only getting through one chapter. I mean, I had to spend a lot of time getting the stream back up, so. But here we are. And while Theoden went by slow paths in the hills, the grey company passed swiftly over the plain. And on the next day in the afternoon they came to Edoras, and there they halted only briefly ere they passed up the valley, and so came to Dunharrow as darkness fell. The Lady Eowyn greeted them, and was glad of their coming, for no mightier men had she seen than the Dudundain and the fair sons of Elrond, but on Aragorn most of all her eyes rested. And when they sat at supper with her, they talked together, and she heard of all that had passed since Theoden rode away, concerning which only hasty tidings had yet reached her. And when she heard of the battle in Helm's Deep, and the great slaughter of their foes, and the charge of Theoden and his knights, then her eyes shone. But at last she said, Lords, you are weary, and shall now go to your beds with such ease as can be contrived in haste, but tomorrow fairer housing shall be found for you. But Aragorn said, Nay, lady, be not troubled for us. If we may lie here tonight and break our fast tomorrow, it will be enough, for I ride on an errand most urgent, and with the first light of morning we must go. She smiled on him and said, Then it is kindly done, Lord, to ride so many miles out of your way to bring tidings to Eowyn, and to speak with her in her exile. Indeed, no man would count such a journey wasted, said Aragorn, and yet, lady, I could not have come hither if it were not for the road which I must take leads me to Dunharrow. And she answered as one that likes not what is said, Then, Lord, you are astray, for out of Harrowdale no road runs east or south, and you had best return as you came. Nay, lady, said he, I am not astray, for I walked in this land ere you were born to grace it. There is a road out of this valley, and that road I shall take. Tomorrow I shall ride by the paths of the dead. Then she stared at him as one that is stricken, and her face blanched, and for long she spoke no more, while all sat silent. But Aragorn, she said at last, is it then your errand to seek death? For that is all that you will find on that road. They do not suffer the living to pass. They may suffer me to pass, said Aragorn, but at the least I will adventure it. No other road will serve. Now let's talk briefly about what he's basically saying. Yeah, well, I'm different. I'm him. You know, Aragorn is starting to come out of his shell more, and become more and more of what he needs to be. Like when Gimli sort of was like, hey, to look into that Palantir, that is really dangerous. And he gave him don't you know who I am? Like, this is me we're talking about here. I'm different. I'm him. We got to talk about Éowyn. It was actually Tolkien's original plan that Éowyn was going to marry Aragorn at the end of the story. And what's really cool is that there were two characters that got combined into one. There was Éowyn, which was Theoden's niece, and there was another character named Indis, who was his daughter. And basically, he combined them into. He thought Indis is a bit of a useless character. She's not serving much, so we're going to just take her out of it. But we're going to give a lot of her traits to Éowyn. And but then something happened in Tolkien's mind where he said, Aragorn is sort of a third age version of Beren. He needs a Luthien. And it was very, very late in the story when he came up with the idea of Arwen. Very, very late. As a matter of fact, it was around the same time that Arwen was introduced to the story and written into it as they changed the name from Trotter to Strider, and because it was very late when Trotter became Strider. I mean, he became a man instead of a hobbit very early on, but the name Trotter was almost right till the end. Strider was almost like one of the last things he changed. But anyway, this is why we have this sort of Éowyn making eyes at Aragorn, and oh Lord, you're so fair, and he says, I'm going to the Pass of the Den. She's thinking this is like the first nice, handsome man, powerful guy that's come by here who might be worth something. And then he's saying he's going through the Pass of the Den. She's like, it's just my luck, isn't it, right? But there was originally going to be a romance between Aragorn and Éowyn. Arwen didn't exist in the story at that point. She was created to be the Third Age Luthien because Tolkien realized that there was a lot of similarities between Aragorn and Beren. And that's interesting because then he realized, wait, I got to write a romance between Arwen and Aragorn now. And what's crazy about it is that he didn't write it in time. It winds up half finished, and it's in the appendix, the tale of Aragorn and Arwen, and it's only an excerpt. So there you have that. Let's move on here. Oh, where did I leave off? Here we go. No, that's no, I gotta go back further than that. Here we are. But this is madness, she said. For here are men of renown and prowess, whom you should not take into the shadows, but should lead to war, where whom you should not take... let's try that again. Where men are needed. I beg you to remain and ride with my brother, for then all our hearts will be gladdened and our hope be the brighter. It is not madness, lady, he answered, for I go on a path appointed. But those who follow me do so of their free will, and if they wish now to remain and ride with the Rohirrim, they may do so, but I shall take the paths of the dead, alone if needs be. Then they said no more, and they ate in silence, but her eyes were ever upon Aragorn, and the others saw that she was in great torment of mind. At length they arose, and took their leave of the lady, and thanked her for her care, and went to their rest. But as Aragorn came to the booth where he was to lodge with Legolas and Gimli, he and his companions had gone in. There came the Lady Éowyn after him, and called to him. He turned and saw her as a glimmer in the night, for she was clad in white, but her eyes were on fire. Aragorn, she said, why will you go on this deadly road? Because I must, he said. Only so can I see any hope of doing my part in the war against Sauron. I do not choose paths of peril, Éowyn. Were I to go where my heart dwells far in the north, I would be now wandering in the fair valley of Rivendell. Elrond didn't have a daughter until he finished The Lord of the Rings. Well, until he was almost finished, basically. She was a very late addition. He had to go back and sort of insert her into the you have to remember that he was writing it as one book. He wasn't meaning for it to be broken up into pieces. That was because it was a post World War II. There wasn't a lot of paper still, even in the early 50s. So Elrond had sons, but he didn't have a daughter at that point. She was added, and he had to make it make sense. He had to, because she had to be able to choose to be mortal, and therefore she had to be a descendant of Eärendil, so making her Elrond's daughter made, pretty much the most sense there. Let's see. For a while she was silent, as if pondering what this might mean. Then suddenly she laid her hand on his arm. "You are a stern lord and resolute," she said, "and thus do men win renown." She paused. "Lord," she said, "if you must go, then let me ride in your following, for I am weary of skulking in the hills and wish to face peril and battle." "Your duty is with your people," he answered. "Too often have I heard of duty," she cried, "but am I not of the house of Eorl, a shield maiden and not a dry nurse? I have waited on faltering feet long enough. Since they falter no longer, it seems, may I not now spend my life as I will?" "Few may do that with honor," he said. "But as for you, lady, did you not accept the charge to govern the people until their lord's return? If you had not been chosen, then some marshal or captain would have been set in the same place, and he could not ride away from his charge were he be weary of it or no." "Shall I always be chosen?" she said bitterly. "Shall I always be left behind when the riders depart, to mind the house while they win renown, and find food and beds when they return?" "A time may come soon," said he, "when none will return. Then there will be need of valor without renown, for none shall remember the deeds that are done in the last defense of your homes. Yet the deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised." And she answered, "All your words are but to say you are a woman and your part is in the house. And when the men have died in battle and honor, you have to leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need it no more. But I am of the house of Eorl and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain or death." "What do you fear, lady?" he asked. "A cage," she said. "To stay behind bars until use and old age accept them, and all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire." "And yet you counseled me not to adventure on the road that I had chosen because it is perilous." "So may one counsel another," she said. "Yet I do not bid you to flee from peril, but to ride to battle where your sword may win renown and victory. I would not see a thing that is high and excellent cast away needlessly." "Nor would I," he said. "Therefore I say to you, lady, stay, for you have no errand to the south. Neither have those who go with thee. They go only because they would not be parted from thee, because they love thee." Then she turned and vanished into the night. So, maybe he met his own wife in the woods. Tolkien and his wife, they have a really good romance, actually. I really like the story of their romance, but he does have a habit of having his important couples meet in the woods. Beren met Luthien in the woods. Thingol met Melian in the woods. Aragorn met Arwen in the woods. So there you have it. Really cool thing here between Éowyn and Aragorn. Really important stuff. She's basically saying "I love you" to him without saying it. Because he's saying you don't have a reason to go to the paths of the dead, and she says, "Well, neither do any of these other guys. They're going with you because they love you," but she just asked to go with him. Thankfully, she does fall in love with somebody that's going to love her, and we do get a nice little romance between her and Faramir. But that's later. That's quite a bit later. But anyway, going back to the film version, I mentioned a lot the characters that they got absolutely wrong. Frodo, Faramir, Gimli, Denethor. The characters that they got right, though, we talk a lot about Gandalf, Sam, Éowyn. Absolutely, they got her right. They got her really right. And one thing that I really like is what we're seeing here is, without the character even being present, the kinship between Eowyn and Merry. Because what is it that Merry says? I don't want to be left out of the songs and the tales. I don't want to be the one to be left behind because I'm short and useless and, I haven't been in a lot of battles, I don't care if I go out to battle and die, at least I won't be left out of the songs and the tales. And Eowyn is basically saying the same thing here. So now you wonder, well, why would she take him along? Now you know why, because they are so much the same character, Eowyn and Merry. The only thing that they really got wrong, which it wasn't a bad thing, I want to mention this. It was a change that I liked, was that as soon as she scooped him up onto the horse, he realized who it was. In the book, he doesn't realize that this Durnhelm person is Eowyn until she takes off her helmet. But yeah, you're seeing a lot of like the things that Merry was saying echoed in what Eowyn is saying, and then it's going to be re-echoed when Merry says it all again, and that's why Merry and Eowyn become so very close to each other. And like and she gives him that silver horn that he's going to use in the Shire later on. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that they're very similar characters, And by the way, I think Merry is a character that was not exactly gotten right at all times in the film, but for the most part, they did a really good job with Merry. I think they just made him and Pippin a little too similar to each other. They didn't show us the differences in personality and how serious Merry is. As I mentioned earlier, he's actually a very serious fellow. You like Eowyn's secret name Durnhelm? You think it means close to secret control. She's taking control of her tomb. Well, see, now Durnhelm is, as a name from Rohan, it is essentially in their language. That language is represented as Old English. And it's not exactly secret control. It's hidden protector. Who is the most different between the books and the movies? Faramir. Faramir was Frodo's like number 2, but Faramir was the one that they mangled Faramir. They mangled Faramir. They mangled Gimli too. They really mangled Frodo. Those are the 3 worst in my opinion. Denethor, I think that they were changing him for a reason, and I don't agree with that reason, but I understand why they made the decisions that they made with Denethor. Durndingle was the second secret meeting place of the Ents. The helm of a ship is the place of control. Okay, that's true, but like I said, it's Old English. So Durnhelm is hidden protector. Hidden and secret are similar enough, but it's protector. You're thinking of the helm of a ship, the place of control. I'm talking about a helm as a piece of armor protection. You have to remember that as well. So you're thinking of helm in a more nautical sense. I'm talking about it in a more Old English sense. So because it doesn't make sense for her to name herself something about control. I mean, if it was something about her taking control of her destiny, I would understand that. But yeah, like Durnhelm is basically just that she's protecting in secret. Because she's riding close to Theoden, and she's got Merry with her as well. So it's like I said, it's actually secret protector. But yeah, let's move on here. But yeah, the most different between books and movies, I don't think anybody would really argue much that it's Faramir. I don't think anybody would say otherwise. I mean, maybe you can make an argument for Elrond, too. But that was really... See, Elrond, I think, was just acted wrong. I think that was Hugo Weaving's fault. He put too much intensity into it. But... he always seemed angry. If you notice, Elrond always seems like he's really angry, whereas he shouldn't be like that. But that's just, because that's what Hugo Weaving does. He glares. He glares. That's his main acting tool, and it works really well for him. because I like Hugo Weaving as an actor, but I think he was wrong to play that. He should have been Denethor, to be honest with you. You put a little gray hair on him, he could be Denethor now, right? All right. It was his eyebrow. Well, he does have very stern, angular eyebrows. Like he looks like Namor the Submariner. He's a very unusual looking guy. He's not like ugly or anything, but he's just he's all angles. All right, let's move on because we only have a little bit left. Looks like we were probably not going to get through more than one chapter anyway. When the light of day was come into the sky, but the sun was not yet risen above the high ridges in the east, Aragorn made ready to depart. His company was all mounted, and he was about to leap into the saddle, when the Lady Eowyn came to bid them farewell. She was clad as a rider, and girt with a sword. In her hand she bore a cup, and she set it to her lips and drank a little, wishing them good speed, and then she gave the cup to Aragorn, and he drank. And he said, Farewell, Lady of Rohan. I drink to the fortunes of your house, and of you and of your people. Say to your brother, beyond the shadows we may meet again. Then it seemed to Gimli and Legolas, who were nearby, that she wept, and in one so stern and proud that seemed the more grievous. But she said, Aragorn, wilt thou go? I will, he said. Then wilt thou not let me ride with this company as I have asked? I will not, lady, he said. For that I cannot grant without leave of the king and of your brother, and they will not return until tomorrow. But I count now every hour, indeed every minute. Farewell. And she fell on her knees, saying, I beg thee. Nay, lady, he said, and taking her by the hand he raised her. Then he kissed her hand, and sprang into the saddle, and rode away, and did not look back. And only those who knew him well, and were near him, saw the pain that he bore. But Eowyn stood still as a figure carved in stone, her hands clenched at her sides, and she watched them until they passed into the shadows, into the black Dwimmerberg, the haunted mountain, in which was the door of the dead. When they were lost to view, she turned, stumbling as one that is blind, and went back to her lodging. But none of her folk saw this parting, for they hid themselves in fear, and would not come forth until the day was up, and the reckless strangers were gone. And some said, They are elvish wights. Let them go where they belong, into the dark places, and never return. The times are evil enough. The light was still grey as they rode, for the sun had not yet climbed over the black ridges of the haunted mountain before them. A dread fell on them, even as they passed between the lines of ancient stones, and so came to the Dimmelt. There, under the gloom of black trees that not even Legolas could long endure, they found a hollow place opening at the mountain's root, and right in their path stood a single mighty stone like a finger of doom. My blood runs chill, said Gimli, but the others were silent, and his voice fell dead on the dark fir needles at his feet. The horses would not pass the threatening stone until the riders dismounted and led them about. And so they came at last, deep into the glen, and there stood a sheer wall of rock, and in the wall the dark door gaped before them like the mouth of night. Signs and figures were carved above its wide arch, too dim to read, and fear flowed from it like a grey vapour. The company halted, and there was not a heart among them that did not quail, unless it were the heart of Legolas of the Elves, of whom the ghosts of men have no terror. This is an evil door, said Halbarad, and my death lies beyond it. I will not dare to pass it nonetheless, but no horse will enter. Or he said, I will dare to pass it nonetheless, but no horse will enter. But we must go in, and therefore the horses must go too, said Aragorn. For if we ever come through this darkness, many leagues lie beyond, and every hour that is lost there will bring the triumph of Sauron nearer. Follow me. Then Aragorn led the way, and such was the strength of his will in that hour that all the Dunedain and their horses followed him, and indeed the love that the horses of the Rangers bore for their riders was so great that they were willing to face even the terror of the door, if their masters' hearts were steady as they walked beside them. But Arod, the horse of Rohan, refused the way, and he stood sweating and trembling in a fear that was grievous to see. Then Legolas laid his hands on his eyes, and sang some words that went soft in the gloom, until he suffered himself to be led, and Legolas passed in. And there stood Gimli the dwarf, left all alone. His knees shook, and he was wroth with himself. Here is a thing unheard of, he said. An elf will go underground, and a dwarf dare not. With that he plunged in, but it seemed to him that he dragged his feet like lead over the threshold. and at once a blindness came upon him, even upon Gimli Gloin's son, who had walked unafraid into many deep places of the world. Halbarad does die, yeah, but he dies at the Battle of Pelennor Fields. So he does survive the ordeal of going there and with the Corsairs and everything. So his death doesn't necessarily lie beyond the door. I mean, in a way, you could say, well, Aragorn dies too eventually, right? Gimli dies. They everybody but Legolas dies, right? Eventually. So, but yeah, I mean, in a way, we could say that he is foreseeing his own death, but I would say that he's wrong in that. He looks alien. Oh, you're talking about I said his name like 5 times earlier. Now I can't think of it. Hugo Weaving. He looks alien. Well, it makes sense. He played the in the Matrix, right? All right, let's continue here. Aragorn had brought torches from Dunharrow, and now he went ahead, bearing one aloft, and Elladan went with another went at the rear, and Gimli, stumbling behind, strove to overtake him. He could see nothing but the dim flame of the torches, but if the company halted, there seemed an endless whisper of voices all about him, a murmur of words in no tongue that he had ever heard before. Nothing assailed the company, nor withstood their passage, and yet steadily fear grew on the dwarf as he went on, most of all because he knew now that there could be no turning back. All the paths behind were thronged by an unseen host that followed in the dark. So time unreckoned passed until Gimli saw a sight that he was ever afterwards loth to recall. The road was wide as far as he could judge, but now the company came suddenly into a great empty space, and there were no longer any walls upon either side. The dread was so heavy upon him that he could hardly walk. It's interesting that he becomes the focal character here, by the way. Mostly because probably he's the one that told the story to Frodo. Away to the left something glittered in the gloom as Aragorn's torch drew near. Then Aragorn halted and went to look at what it might be. "Does he feel no fear?" muttered the dwarf. "In any other cave, Gimli Gloin's son would have been first to run at the gleam of gold, but not here. Let it lie." Nonetheless, he drew near and saw Aragorn kneeling, while Elladan held aloft both torches. Before him were the bones of a mighty man. He had been clad in mail, and still his harness lay there whole, for the cavern's air was dry as dust, and his hauberk was gilded. His belt was of gold and garnets, and rich with gold was the helm upon his bony head face downward on the floor. He had fallen near the far wall of the cave, as now could be seen, and before him stood a stony door closed fast. His finger bones were still clawing at the cracks. A notched and broken sword lay by him, as if he had hewn at the rock in his last despair. Aragorn did not touch him, but after gazing silently for a while he rose and sighed. "Hither shall the flowers of Simbilmaine come never into the world's end," he murmured. 9 mounds and 7 there are now green with grass, and through all the long years he has lain at the door that he could not unlock. Whither does it lead? Why would he pass? None shall ever know. "For that is not my errand," he cried, turning back and speaking to the whispering darkness behind. "Keep your hoards and your secrets hidden in the accursed years. Speed only we ask. Let us pass and then come. I summon you to the stone of Erech." There was no answer, unless it was an utter silence more dreadful than the whispers before, and then a chill blast came in when the torches flickered and went out and could not be rekindled. Of the time that followed, 1 hour or many, Gimli remembered little. The others pressed on, but he was ever hindmost, pursued by a groping horror that seemed always just about to seize him, and a rumour came after him like the shadow sound of many feet. He stumbled on until he was crawling like a beast on the ground, and felt that he could endure no more. He must either find an ending and escape, or run back in madness to meet the following fear. Suddenly he heard the tinkle of water, a sound hard and clear as a stone falling into a dream of dark shadow. Light grew, and lo, the company passed through another gateway, high arched and broad, and a hill ran out beside them, and beyond, going steeply down, was a road between sheer cliffs, knife-edged against the sky far above. So deep and narrow was that chasm that the sky was dark, and in that the small stars glinted. Yet, as Gimli after learned, it was still 2 hours ere sunset of the day on which they had set out from Dunharrow, though for all that he could tell them, it might have been twilight in some later year or in some other world. Yeah, just a little further beyond, exactly. Just a little further. I mean, so is Aragorn's, right? Okay, so I just want to mention what he said. Okay, so the skeleton, by the way, was a prince of Rohan who went to seek the path of the dead. Obviously, he was trying to get through some mysterious door. Who knows what's behind it? He never got through it. He mentions, hither shall the flowers of Cymbalmine come, never into world's end. Cymbalmine is a yellow flower that came from Gondolin, actually. And it was the same yellow flowers that grew on Glorfindel's grave, and then there was and Tuur saw them when he first came to Gondolin, but they became most famous for where Thorondor, the Lord of the Eagles, drew Glorfindel's body out of the ravine and laid him to rest, and they buried him. And flowers grew, these yellow flowers, and they soon became, Gandalf spoke about it at one point, they grow on the graves of dead men. So that's what he's referring to because of the mounds of the kings of Rohan. That's the Slot Canyon, exactly. Actually, there's some parts of I don't know if you've ever played Skyrim, but in Skyrim, and sometimes there's parts where you go through a cave, and then you come to an outside slot cannon like this, and it reminds me so much of the Paths of the Dead whenever I see something like that. Let's continue. The company now mounted again, and Gimli returned to Legolas. They rode in that's not even a word. They rode in file, and evening came on, and a deep blue dusk and still fear pursued them. Legolas, turning to speak to Gimli, looked back, and the dwarf saw beside his face the glitter in the elf's bright eyes. Behind them rode Elladan, last of the company, but not the last of those that took the downward road. The dead are following, said Legolas. I see shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of cloud, and spears like winter thickets in a misty night. The dead are following. Yes, the dead ride behind. They have been summoned, said Elladan. The company came at last out of the ravine, as suddenly as they had been issued from a crack in the wall, and there lay the uplands of a great vale before them, and the stream beside them went down into a cold voice over many falls. Where in Middle-earth are we? Said Gimli. And Elladan answered, We have descended from the uprising of the Morthond, the long chill river that flows at last to the sea that washes the walls of Dol Amroth. You will not need to ask hereafter how comes its name. Blackroot men call it. The Morthon Vale made a great bay that beat up against the sheer southern faces of the mountains. Its steep slopes were grass-grown, but all was grey in that hour, for the sun had gone, and far below lights twinkled in the homes of men. The vale was rich, and many folk dwelt there. Then, without turning, Aragorn cried aloud so all could hear, Friends, forget your weariness! Ride now, ride! We must come to the Stone of Eric ere this day passes, and long still is this way. So without looking back they rode the mountain fields until they came to a bridge over the growing torrent and found a road that went down into the land. Lights went out in house and hamlet as they came, and doors were shut, and folk that were afield cried in terror and ran wild like hunted deer. Ever there rose the same cry in the gathering night, The King of the Dead! The King of the Dead is come upon us! Bells were ringing far below, and all men fled before the face of Aragorn, but the grey company in their haste rode like hunters, until their horses were stumbling with weariness, and thus, just ere midnight, and in darkness, as black as caverns in the mountains, they came at last to the hill of Eric. So there's this mistake that was made in the film, and it's an understandable mistake, that the King of the Dead is the same king of the mountains that joined Sauron and did not fulfill his oath to Isildur. But the phrase as it's used there, it's pretty unambiguous. It's Aragorn. Aragorn is the King of the Dead. Long had the terror of the dead lain upon that hill and upon the empty fields about it. For upon the top stood a black stone, round as a great globe, the height of a man, though its half was buried in the ground. Unearthly it looked, as though it had fallen from the sky, as some believed. But those who remembered still the lore of Westerness, told that it had been brought out of the ruin of Numenor, and there sat by Isildur at his landing. None of the people of the valley dared approach it, nor would they dwell near, for they said that it was a trysting place of the shadow men, and they would gather in times of fear, thronging round the stone and whispering. To that stone the company came and halted in the dead of night. Then Elrohir gave to Aragorn a silver horn, and he blew upon it, and it seemed to those that stood near that they heard a sound of answering horns, as if it were an echo in deep caves far away. No other sound they heard, and yet they were aware of a great host gathered all about the hill in which they stood, and a chill wind like the breath of ghosts came down from the mountains. But Aragorn dismounted, and standing by the stone he cried in a great voice, Oath-breakers, why have ye come? And a voice was heard out of the night that answered him as if from far away, To fulfill our oath, and to have peace. Then Aragorn said, The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelargir upon Anduin, and ye shall come with me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace, and depart forever. For I am Elisar, Isildur's heir of Gondor. And with that he bade Halbarad unfurl the great standard which he had brought, and behold, it was black, and if there was any device upon it, it was hidden in the darkness. Then there was silence, and not a whisper nor a sigh was heard again all the long night. The company camped beside the stone, but they slept little because the dread of the shadows that hedged them round. But when dawn came, cold and pale, Aragorn rose at once, and he led the company forth upon the journey of greatest haste and weariness that any among them had known, save he alone. And only his will held them to go on. No other mortal men could have endured it, none but the Dunedain of the north, and with them Gimli the dwarf and Legolas of the elves. They passed Tarlang's neck, and came into Lamadon, and the shadow host pressed behind, and fear went on before them, until they came to Kalemdil upon Kiril, and the sun was down like blood behind Pinath Gelen, away in the west behind them. The township and the fords of Kiril they found deserted, for many men had gone away to war, and all that was left fled to the hills at the rumour of the coming of the King of the Dead. But the next day there came no dawn, and the grey company passed on into the darkness of the storm of Mordor, and were lost to mortal sight, but the dead followed them. The most interesting thing to talk about at the end there, because that's the end of that chapter, is the next day there came no dawn. So now, time-wise, you know exactly where Frodo is. He's climbing up the stair of Cirith Ungol along with Sam and Gollum, and he's about to go into Shelob's lair, because that's when Sam and Frodo and Gollum first noticed that it was daytime, but there was no sun, and that is because the vapors coming out of Mordor are blocking out the sun, and this is how Sauron's army is able to fight, during the daytime by just blocking the sun, because a lot of them are orcs, and there are also Ologhai, which are troll folk, who they don't deal very well with the sun. The Ologhai are not like typical trolls, because they don't just instantly turn to stone and die when the sun touches them, but they don't like the sun. They can't really do much in the sun. So the darkness is evil's friend, of course. And so this is, like I said, you can line it up with where Frodo is at the moment. So that being said, it's actually kind of late, huh? I think we would have been able to stop a lot earlier had I not had all those technical issues. Now, hopefully, it's just sort of like a one-time thing, and multi-streaming will work properly. Because after it all went down and I tried to get it up a few times and it didn't work, I tried just connecting to Twitch, and then that worked properly. And then I said, well, let me just try connecting to YouTube, and that worked properly. So we decided to just continue just on YouTube, and I gave all the Twitch people the URL to join us here. But anyway, that is where we're going to stop. I'd like to talk more about it, but it is pretty late. What's really cool is, like I said, the Aragorn is the one. He's the king of the dead, because all these other the dead men of Dunharrow, the Oathbreakers, you can't really see them that well. They're there, you can see the shapes of men and horses, like what Legolas said, but they're hard to discern. Aragorn is the one that's in front. He's the one that he's got the dead behind him, so he is the king of the dead. And the movie, they sort of made the king of the dead a character, that he was like the head oathbreaker. And that's actually perfectly valid, because he was probably meant to be the king of the mountains who did not fulfill his oath. But that title, the way that Tolkien used it, the king of the dead, was specifically referring to Aragorn and the terror that was felt by the people that lived in this area, seeing him ride with great haste with this army behind him of dead people, you know. Of course, like I said, the movie also fumbled the dead army, because they went to Pelennor Fields, which is just no. But no. You know, because he even said, if you come with me to Pelargir at Anduin, which is the Bay of Pelargir, where it meets the Anduin, and you fight with me, I will hold your oaths fulfilled. So that's why, as soon as that happens, Iluvatar is satisfied and allows him to pass into the afterlife. That being said, schedule-wise, if you were watching on Twitch, and I apologize that you are no longer watching on Twitch, you go know that I will be live tomorrow with Dragon Quest II, and of course Saturday with Xenoblade 3, Sunday with Mega Man X8, Tuesday Street Fighter 6, Wednesday Sea of Stars, next Thursday List Critics. I have to send text to Elise and to Jesse to make sure they're good to go for List Critics, right? The Grey Company could also serve as a descriptor of the Army of the Dead. 2 Kings of the Dead, 2 Grey Company. I mean, yeah, they are gray. They're not the Grey Company, but they are a Grey Company. I would say they're more of a Grey Army, because there's a lot more of them. A company is, I mean, there's 30 of them. But yeah, the passing of the Grey Company is meant to be the Dunedain. But you're right. They are gray. They're not clad in gray, but they're just gray because they're ghosts. For those of you watching on YouTube, which is all of you, actually, because I'm only on YouTube right now, I will be live in 2 weeks' time on May 7th with Sid and Matt. I haven't actually heard from Sid. I've been trying to get in touch with him for a while, but the last time I spoke to him, he assured me that he would be there for May 7th to be live for the Council of Tolkien. On the 14th, we will return to read more of The Return of the King, and on the 21st, we'll return to play more of the Two Towers for Game Boy game. And then, by the way, looking even further forward to Thursday, the 4th of June, I will be live with the Council of Tolkien, but Sid will not be there for that. He's sitting this one out. It's actually going to be me and Matt and our good friend Laurel Callahan, and we are going to be performing the Beren and Luthien play. We have to work out a few kinks here regarding narration. I have a professional that's going to be doing it. But that being said, I thank you all for coming. The live is going to end. If you're wanting to watch the VOD, it's going to be like unlisted, so you won't be able to find it until I upload it as a video with the 2 parts put together, and it'll be members only for a little while. But just letting you know that it's going to be taken down like pretty much right after this, because it's 2 different videos, and one of them has the wrong title for some reason. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye, everybody. It was fun. Thank you, Joe.